3, 2, 1, and we're live. Nina, it has been a long time to try and get you on. I've been very excited to have you on because I think that you are an incredible role model for our community, and I'm hoping that we can start from the very beginning and talk a little bit about your background, your family lineage, and move forward, and towards the end we'll get towards how Luna Float came about and your involvement with Vancity. So can you tell us a little bit about the beginning?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, it's kind of funny. It's a story. Is we had talked about me being part of Vancity or working at Vancity for just over 10 years, and then I left for about 4 years to pursue my dream of opening Luna Float. Right. In that 4 years, I got married, I had a baby, just had that whole pandemic thing happen, and I'm actually back at Vancity part-time as well, so surprise. But I'm Chilliwack born and raised. I also graduated from UFB. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Tell us about your family and your background, your connections with Sts'ailes and all of that.
Sure. So, yeah, like I said, Chilliwack born and raised. My dad graduated from Sts'ailes, my mom from Chilliwack. But on my mom's side, she's originally from Sts'ailes. She and her so she was born off reserve. Actually, just recently kind of came to light that her mom, my grandma, it was non-Indigenous, and her dad, my grandpa, was from Sts'ailes and is Indigenous. And some of her siblings were born in Sts'ailes on reserve, but they were still doing there was day school and my grandma basically saw what was happening and moved them off reserve, which was the whole thing. And so they grew up mostly in Lake Erock, but still with connections. Yeah. But and then eventually moved to Chilliwack. So that's where my family's from. Yeah, my mom's maiden name's Leon, and just really close ties still. My aunt and uncle caretake a bed and breakfast, Sasquatch Eco Lodge, owned by Sts'ailes. So yeah, anytime I get a chance to go there, I do, or visit the community in general. I used to play soccer, and we'd go play there or play on the island and all sorts of stuff.
Sts'ailes is like a very unique community, though, because it is one of the largest leaders, I think, on the West Coast of Indigenous communities really working towards being self-sufficient, developing their community in a way that they want, partnering with different communities. So what is that like to see that growth? Because I think that it stands out amongst the rest in leadership and in pushing forward, because when I was a Native court worker, I had the pleasure of meeting with Ralph Leon, I believe Jr., and talking to him about what their goals are for justice and some of their other projects. And I think that they're really setting a strong example. So what has that experience been like to be able to work with them?
Right. So just recently I accepted a position sitting on the board for, they call it Moytelexw, but it was previously known as the Dev Corp, right? The Economic Development Corporation for Sts'ailes, which has been a huge honor to even be considered. And I just, like I said, I love any opportunity to go back into the community, and it's interesting to be able to, I don't know, you're sitting on a board, sometimes it can be very bureaucratic and or business, right? But there's something just healing as well, and calming about it, and just being around certain people in the community. But this Monday I have a board meeting, and it's going to be at the bed and breakfast at Sasquatch Eco Lodge, and I'm excited because they make delicious food. And then we're actually finishing the meeting. We're going out on doing a boat tour. I'm not sure who's doing it, probably Kelsey or Willie Charlie. And it's going to be a cultural tour around Harrison. Yeah. So just a huge opportunity. But to answer your question, I wish I knew more of all the amazing stuff that they're doing, because I know that they are doing stuff. Highlight, I think, is, I can't remember if we had talked about this before, but their work in the community of bringing back youth, especially who are in the system and have been removed from their culture. And I know Willie Charlie in particular had a lot to do with that, of bringing youth back into Sts'ailes. And people that were working with the youth were they're not interested in that, and it's probably maybe they were hesitant or didn't think there'd be as many benefits as there were, but the proof was kind of there, and it's just, I feel like, kind of our ways have been ignored or kind of steamrolled for so long, and it's like, no, like there's something to it, and people should be listening and learning and looking for different ways to do things.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Sts'ailes?
I mean, I probably can't tell you as much as other people can. I mean, for me, my my traditional or ancestral name is Polomia, and that is derived from my great-grandfather, Ed Leon Sr. And from what I understand about him, unfortunately he passed away 5 years before I was born, 1980. But I love hearing stories about him. Kelsey Charlie had spent a lot of time with him, and I know he wrote a book. Well, he didn't write it, but he told it, and someone else wrote it for him because he didn't write. And it was called, well, he wrote a couple, but Mr. Bear and the Baby was my favorite, and you can buy it at the Sts'ailes gift shop. Shameless plug. But so he had 2 traditional names, and I'm learning more as I get older. But so I guess his more common name was actually from Suwali, and it was Shwalimuk, and his second name was Pulamquen. So Pulam is where I got my name from, and the Ia, like the IYA at the end, is just kind of like a feminine form. It's to let people know that the name belongs to a female. And it was kind of interesting because obviously Sts'ailes and the surrounding communities, we speak Halkomelem, or traditionally, and Pulamquen was actually from Lil'wat, from Lillooet. So I'm still learning, actually. Like, I had the naming ceremony when I was 18 years old, and I'm 30. What am I, 36 now? Ooh. And no, I'm 35. And I'll be 36 soon. And just to recently find out that I thought my name was Halkomelem, and it's potentially not. It's from Lillooet.
Wow,
so.
that's amazing. And I think that naming ceremonies are often not as acknowledged by other people because we don't have the opportunity to kind of share both of our names. And I think that you're doing a really good job of tying that in to your LinkedIn page and to really trying to get the word out, because I think that those are those connections that help people understand where you're from and what your background is.
Yeah.
And I think that another interesting aspect about Sts'ailes is the connection with, I guess, what we would call Sasquatch, because they're one of the original people who kind of discovered it and had ancient stories about it.
Yeah. And I feel like the Mr. Bear and the Baby story, it doesn't talk about Sasquatch, but and so again, my great-grandpa, funny guy. He was really good at trapping, and he told stories. He just seemed like such a character, and he was very independent and free, and he kind of just did what he wanted, but he also was very instrumental in keeping the language and potlatches alive when it was illegal. And so I think he was a bit of a rebel. And for me, I mean, it's been a journey. I'm very fortunate that even though my mom was born off the reserve, she had, I think there was a lot of racism. Obviously there was growing up, and there's that identity piece that's probably taken from her to a degree. But again, because she kept a lot of ties and connections to her family, it wasn't fully lost. But and then when we were in school, she actually went back and she became a teacher's assistant with kind of the Indigenous lens. So she was a First Nations teacher's assistant, and that put her in connection with more teachers and knowledge keepers. And so she had a lot of learnings through that, which I'm super grateful for. And I mean, growing up in Chilliwack, I felt, I was far from that family in Sts'ailes, but such a welcoming, connected people. And so I had cousins who were also from the Jimmy Reserve. So then all the Jimmys were just well, we're cousins now. And I'm like, okay. And it just felt connected. But growing up, looking at me, people wouldn't assume maybe I was First Nations, which opens up a whole nother kind of weird I don't know, like opportunity for people to be racist in front of you because they don't know that they're going to offend you. And not that that's better. I obviously have like a lot of privilege behind that as well. But as I got older, I'd play soccer and then I would get questioned, prove that you're Native, right? And it was like, okay, well, that's my mom, that's my cousin, and so that was something I grew up with was feeling, I don't know, kind of like scared to be myself or not knowing what that was and not knowing where I belong, what's my place and stuff like that. And it's ironic because, again, working at Vancity, of all places, helped me kind of rediscover that connection. I was planning an executive retreat, and I was always been proud of my community of Sts'ailes, and so I reached out to them and I was like, could we do something like that? I know there's like a lot of storytellers, I know there's so much culture, and it's a beautiful space, and again, any excuse to just be out there. And so we did it, and it just was so reaffirming that this is where I belong. And again, I keep on saying Willie, Charlie, and Kelsey Charlie. It was the Charlie Longhouse where we had our naming ceremony, and he just said, like, he talked about my lineage. He talked, and like that's like they're just so amazing to listen to them speak and to have someone know so much about your family and their history, and to also just include you in that. And that, like, this is, like, he basically said, like, this is your birthright, you belong here. And I needed to hear that because I mean, I felt it, but I don't know, I also, I guess, had doubts as well, right? And so yeah, that was really just, again, really good medicine. And I knew I wanted to do something more along the line, like, just I wanted any excuse to go back into the community and be a part of it in any way I can. So in kind of a roundabout way, I mean, now I'm on the Moytelexw board, which is awesome, and we're still learning more and sitting back and watching and learning, contributing however I can. But yeah, and then I think, I guess, not necessarily directly to my community, but Stalo in general. I've sat on the Stalo Community Futures Lending Committee, part of the Stalo Business Association. Just wanting to.
Can you tell us more about what that struggle was like between the two communities? Because I think that that's something that is a deep problem Indigenous people have. My mom had it because she was part of the 60s scoop, so she was taken in by this Caucasian family that ended up helping a fair bit. But then she always felt this disconnect between both communities, Chihuahua and her Caucasian family, because she didn't feel like she was 100% in either camp. And she still struggles with that today. And I think that that is one area where the disconnect from culture is important for people to understand, because it's like you have one foot in both camps and you don't feel fully accepted by either. And having somebody just be able to say, hey, like, you're accepted here, this is your family, you have a right to be here, nobody can take this away from you, is something that I think helps people to feel more comfortable, and that acceptance of being brought onto boards and being brought back into the community makes a big difference for people. So can you tell us about some of those struggles at certain points where maybe you wanted to reach out and you didn't know how, or you didn't know how to reconnect with the culture in the right way, or any of those types of stories?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of my mom, but I know that she would be able to relate with that, I'm sure. Especially going to like high school and stuff like that, where, I mean, she graduated in the 70s, and now she still is in the school system teaching. And there's books that they still unfortunately use now that they're so old, and it's like, it's racist, it's bad. Like, they shouldn't be having these books in there. Just the way they're describing them in this, like, kind of like anthropology way of like, oh yes, the local Indian is, they have coarse features and small hands. Like, it was just weird. And like, these are books that were still in the system like now. And she, I feel like probably didn't feel like she fit in either way, but she's a strong, confident woman, and she's very resilient and amazing. But so I think I maybe fed off of that, her confidence, and Yeah. And then again, having family just support you and let you know that you belong. But I think it's the hardest part is now, like, not that it's popular to be Indigenous, but it's people are a little bit more hungry for that knowledge, and they just assume now, like, okay, like the steps of me, it felt like not knowing necessarily where I fit in, um, and then people accepting that, oh, okay, so you are Indigenous, you are First Nations, and you have family in Sts'ailes, but what does that mean? Or they just assume, especially as my role in like Stalo Business Association, that now I know everything about Indigenous culture and First Nations culture, and like I must be fluent in the language, and they kind of put those on you when it's like, no, we're still very much like the learnings that people have are, it's a privilege to learn about our culture, and sometimes, you know, non-Indigenous people who've done the work, which is really awesome, but then they just assume that every Indigenous person knows the same thing, and it's like, no, like it was like it had been tried to be taken away from us in such a brutal way that we're slowly getting to like relearn it. And I remember it was kind of unfortunate. I had most of my learnings and reconnecting through the community because of tragedy. It'd be because of someone had passed away in the community, and or someone was sick, and we would go to a ceremony, or we'd go to a funeral, and then I'd learn a little bit more about the culture, and people were slowly, like elders were slowly sharing that information. And yeah, so it's kind of a sad way to learn about your culture, but I'm grateful that, you know, it happened and that there were opportunities for that, for sure.
Yeah, I think that that is definitely a hard part, especially right now, because I think there is this deep hunger for the language and for learning about the stories and what it means to be Indigenous. But I think that Indigenous people are put in a rock and a hard place of the regular society wants to learn more, and I've had a lot of people reach out wanting to do like Indigenous awareness training, and how do we communicate that information in an effective way that brings people together. But at the same time, it's like a lot of us are still trying to gain that understanding and learn more about it to be able to share that. And so we're in this weird circumstance of like, tell me more. And it's like, well, we're still learning.
Yeah.
And how am I supposed to play both hands and play this important role? And then I think for some people, they've had that disconnect and now they don't know. And people are like, well, tell me about your culture. And they're like, you took it. This is, well, not you, but
yeah,
like I've had this stolen from me. I've had this stolen from my family. And now you want me to tell you all about all the great qualities about it. And it's like, it's a little late for that. This would have been nice before all of the tragedies occurred, because it is, and it always has been, an interesting culture to understand and to see the depth of it. Because one thing I really took away from the Eddie Gardner interview was how he described creatures. Because I think in Western culture, bugs are somehow looked down on, because mosquitoes, bees, things that like might be inconvenient. Yet he described them as the ones that crawl. And I thought that that was such an interesting way to go about it. And we didn't end up talking about it, but there's that idea there that he's talking about them as if they're equal to him, as if there isn't, he's not better than them. And I think that that's something Western culture really struggles with, because we do talk about all of these things as if they're not intelligent, as if they're less than, as if they're just tools for our own success. And I think that that misses some of the beauty of our culture, in that we do have this symbiotic relationship with most things that other cultures, especially Western culture, doesn't. And I think that you see it a little bit with hunting, because I do think that most hunters, a lot of their proceeds go towards supporting ecosystems and stuff. But there's that deep divide right now with this relationship with food, with animals, with the relationship we have with our ecosystems, that we think we're on top. And so that everything else we can just fix if there's problems. And I think that that's probably the wrong way about going about that.
It's funny, like for the longest time, and it's funny because the way you learn about your culture again is like, it comes from different angles, comes from different ways. And I think just like being around family, and there's maybe even slang, or like one of my coworkers was what does OCM mean? Can you, and like, I was like, how do you spell OCM? And then I'm thinking like, because I'm like, if you're hip, you just type out OCM, right? I'm like, that's like just the slang. And I'm like, So it's kind of funny learning it through that kind of lens. Or all my relations.
Yeah.
All my relations, this is like kind of a funny admitting this, but for like when I was younger, like we always said that, and I always thought it meant because we have so many cousins, all my relations, we can't keep track. But like obviously, I like learned later on that like it means more like all our relations, like how we're interconnected with everything, and the animals and the creatures and the world, right?
Yeah, that 7 generations idea, I think, is just, it needs to be stressed again and again and again, because right now I feel like we have this like hunger for like, what is our purpose here? Why are we here? What's the point of it all? And I see these ideas of like, well, the goal is to be happy, and the goal is to have a good day, and like self-care. And it's like, the idea is so much deeper than that, because it's like the idea in Indigenous culture is like you have a responsibility to the 7 generations before you. And when I just talked to Andrew Victor, and the idea that they had prayers about what their next generations would do and would see and would experience. And you can only imagine what the prayers of people going through Indian residential school would be, what their hopes would be for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And you can imagine that they were hoping that we would get out of this, and that some of this tragedy would come to an end. And I think that we're seeing that today. A lot of the tragedies have at least stopped getting worse. And so we have a responsibility to those individuals who survived hell to pay that forward to the next generations, and to help the next generations do better. And that idea that we look back 7 generations and look forward 7 generations, it puts such an enormous amount of weight on an individual, because you try and think of all, like, I can barely keep track of 2 generations back, let alone 7, and what they would have been thinking. And then you try and think 7 generations forward, and that's just as difficult, because we're in this cycle of new iPhone, new laptop, what's my plan for my family. We forget that this is bigger than all of us, that this has a longer term outlay of what's 7 generations forward. You're likely like, they're not going to remember our names in 7 generations and who we were and what we were thinking at this time. And so we're working for those individuals and trying to support the people behind us. I think that is a far better, more meaningful way to live a life, because when you are carrying a lot of stress or weight, it's all for a greater purpose. And I think that that's something that's really missing from our community.
No, that's the perfect way to say it, because I mean, I've struggled with anxiety and mental health, and I feel like anxiety, there's that overwhelming sense that you just have all of this weight on your shoulder. And the people that I look up to the most in our community, they have this just natural calm about them, and it's like a slow, purposeful, just intent, and they just kind of, and I think, like, how can they be like that when they're also carrying so much and doing so much? But it's like you just strive to have that, or be close to that energy. And I think it's because you're not thinking about, well, you're removing the ego piece, right? It's not about you. And if it's like the ecosystem, everything's connected, but it's like that one salmon you caught, or that one deer that you've killed, and you just focus on the one thing, and you're not being overwhelmed by everything else, right? So it's just like having the intent and the purpose behind it. And
there's a different energy when I was speaking to both Eddie and Andrew about their mindset and how they approach things. There was like, I really quickly realized, because I'm a pretty quick talker, I'm fairly fast paced, and then just sitting there and being like, I need to slow my brain down, because this is not the pace that they're thinking at or trying to work towards. The goal to them is to deliver the message in a clear, calm fashion, rather than trying to get out the next point as fast as possible. And I think that that's something, when I'm in law school, the gold standard is to say the thing as fast as you can, as concise as you can, and that element of delivering the information so that people are paying attention and hearing what you're saying and being able to flow along, and having listeners reach out and go like, I just felt like at peace when I was listening to him talk, was like, wow, that is something I don't have. Like, at this stage of my life, I don't have that calm sense of tranquility that others have.
And that's actually, yeah, that's one of my goals, I think, or like I want to work towards. I speak when I do any speaking stuff. It's not because I'm a gifted speaker by any means. It's more of like self kind of proclaimed exposure therapy, like being anxious. It's not something I particularly want to do, is speak in public, but I don't know. I feel like it's something like, you know, looking for the lesson or trying to grow and improve on something. So if I'm not good at something, I want to be better. And I feel like there's something there that I need to learn. And I feel like sometimes, I don't know if it's like self-proclaimed ADHD, where my thoughts are happening faster. And so I just I want to get them all out. And so I call it verbal diarrhea. It's just like, blah. So sometimes when I'm speaking, as much as I want to be prepared, I also, it's a double-edged sword, kind of fine line to cross. But part of me wants to be open to whatever my ancestors tell me I need to talk about today and just kind of go with it. But then that sometimes I'm like, I wonder what's going to come out of my mouth today. Yeah.
That's something I don't think people are honest enough about, is that for the most part, it's not like I'm going, when I'm speaking, that I'm going to say the sky, and like going through each word. It's like you have an idea in your head and the words are just kind of flowing, and it's like you're thinking while you're speaking, because you don't exactly know what the next sentence is going to be, because it's all part of this bigger whatever you're talking about. If you're trying to explain like what Luna float is, there's so much to it that it's whatever's coming out first. It's not like, okay, I always go first, I talk about this and then I talk about this, and then like your brain doesn't really work like that. And so I think that it's important that we give people that grace, and that's why I like the 3-hour format, is because we'll get there and we don't have to stress so much about like I need to make sure that I mention this, that, or the other thing. We're just having a conversation and it will go where it needs to go over time. And I think that really helps people not have that stress on them.
Yeah, I try to, if I do try to explain it to anyone, it's sometimes like you're talking on a phone. And I guess now I'm thinking about this, I think it still happens with cell phones, but I was thinking an older school phone, landline, when you're talking and you can hear like yourself kind of like echoing. Sometimes when I'm talking, I feel like I'm hearing myself like what I just said versus it's a strange phenomenon. So practicing the pause is what I try to think of. I also used to really not like silence, so it would just like to have someone not respond right away. It's like, maybe I'll just keep on talking because they're not responding yet, and just learning that, like, just to appreciate that pause, and it's a time to absorb what you just listened to. And I don't know, just like again, it's a more calm way. Not saying that one way's better or worse, or but it's definitely something I also really appreciate and try to take as a lesson, and trying to do it myself a little bit better, of just being okay if I have to like pause and think about what someone asked me, because
and giving yourself that space to kind of prepare a response rather than trying to come out with the first thought that pops into your head, because that might not always be the best one. Can you tell us about going from high school into university? What decisions were you making at that time? Because it jumps out at me that you were so interested in like the business side of things. What pulled you in that direction?
I kind of skimmed past my childhood and all that stuff, which is fine, fine by me. But it's interesting where I am now, and then looking back, so it's kind of funny. When I was younger, I was like the kid on the corner selling freezies and that sort of thing. So I always have had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit. My younger sister would help out, and I would pay her. And I actually calculated profit. And like at a young age, I had these little books and ledgers. I was a nerd. I loved going into the bank and getting the rate sheets. It's so strange because my sister is definitely not like that. So I don't know where I really got it from, but. And then in high school, I mean, I was AB honor student, like I was doing pretty good. Had a lot of stresses put on me because of that. Like, I don't know, you just feel like you have to, I don't know, they put so much stress on high school students. I'm sure they still do, that you have to have your whole life figured out. You know, I mean, they do. Like, you have to take this grade 12 course in grade 10 to make sure it all fits on your syllabus. And I had no idea. I really liked sciences. I loved biology. I loved animals. I worked at a vet's clinic for a brief moment, just part of the workplace program, which was great because it taught me that I didn't want to become a vet. I loved animals, and the vet just they did amazing work, but they were doing a lot of prescriptions and the surgeries, and it was the vet techs that were doing more of the hands-on with the animals, and there was like lots of other stuff that I was like, okay, maybe not, but that was my dream as a kid, and so it was kind of nice to have that experience to find out before you take 7 years of veterinarian school if this is actually something you would want to do in the environment you want to work in. So I was like, maybe that's not the course for me. Even though, like I said, AB honor student, I graduated, I paused and was like, I kind of stumbled, and I was scared of going to university and taking that next step. I kind of forgot about that, but yeah, it was scary. I tried to stay back and take like a grade 13 like physics and chemistry course because I just wasn't sure yet. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and that huge lesson there was just that, like, keep moving forward, because at that point I was like moving back. I was, or at least staying still and like refusing to move forward because fear of failure, really. And I think my biggest takeaway from there was just keep moving forward. You don't have to have it all figured out, because there's learnings and mistakes, and like kind of embracing making a mistake. Take a course that sucked and or that you didn't like, but guess what? The learning is that that's not for you, or there's other things that happen when you go down a path and you're not quite sure where you're going. There's sometimes reasons for it, or at least for me, that's what I try to take away when, we're talking about adversity. Sometimes it's hard for me to think about it because whenever I'm given something that's an obstacle or, not the greatest, I tend to try to turn it into a learning. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the best thing. It's probably a trauma response, but that's what I try to do. So yeah, it was a slow transition into going to UFB, but I did, and I just did that. I started with a couple of courses, sciences. I took biology, chemistry, math, all of these things, and wasn't loving it. I mean, I love biology, but and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this degree in biology and like a Bachelor of Science degree. But then what? And so even early on, like within the first couple semesters, I was like, I asked my parents, like, hey, me, like, what should I do? And this is something I miss, like not growing up in my community, is what they do when babies are first born. They all the elders, all the family watch them, and they let them be babies, they let them be kids and play. But through play, you learn a lot about a person and potentially what path they're going to take. And usually by the time they reach puberty, they're more ushered into this, like, and guided into a more of a role. Like, hey, we've been watching you, and this is what your skills are. And I really wish I had that kind of guidance. And I mean, my parents are amazing, and they did reflect and say, well, you've always been bossy, and maybe you'll be a good boss, or you should be into like entrepreneurship or something, or try something in business. I think they had brought up dietitian because I would tell people what to do, and that would at least be take part of my science learnings and stuff like that. But I took a marketing course, and it's also funny. So I took a marketing course with Mark Breedveld, he was in his first year of teaching. So this was many years ago, and I just laugh, where I think it's funny because he actually just reached out to me recently, and he's now like the head of, I think, the marketing department, or maybe even the business department at UFB. And he found me on LinkedIn, and we reconnected and talked about some stuff. But yeah, I thought marketing was cool. It kind of has different elements. Like I ended up getting a business degree and focused on finance and accounting, but my electives were philosophy and psychology. And I actually, right before I opened Lunafloat, I re-enrolled and thought I was going to get a second degree in psychology. Yeah. I'm super passionate about it, but apparently starting a business is really time consuming. And so it kind of petered out, and I was like, okay, I need to focus on this. But it's always just been something that I like learning about. So marketing was kind of my gateway into business. And I started taking more courses, and then I realized that at least if I have a business degree, maybe there's more different kind of opportunities. And I was really envious. I even considered becoming like a dental hygienist because I was envious of my friends who were in trades, who it was like, okay, you do 4 years, but you're also on the job training. And after it, you know exactly what you're going to be. You're going to be an electrician or you're going to be a plumber. And I didn't like that unknown because, again, this was my lesson to learning to just take those steps, even though you don't know what necessarily the final result's going to be. Just go through the steps and go through the motions. Another kind of weird learning was I was really good at communications and human resources. Again, human resources, a lot of the psychological elements behind it about people, right? In general, we're odd people, we're odd things to study. And yet I kind of struggled more with accounting and finance. And back then I felt like there was more, if it was difficult, if it was hard, it was maybe more rewarding, or it was almost like better. When because I was like, oh, this HR is too easy, but maybe I should have focused on that. I don't know. So in the end, I actually got a job at Vancity. I heard about Vancity through a presentation at UFB. One of the students did, and I was like, that's a cool company to work for. And so I inquired, and I got a job as a teller, a bank teller, called it financial service representative. And yeah, I started early on. I had basically, after I graduated, I worked at Stream. Lots of people have worked at Stream, in the call center. And yeah, I worked there for 3 years, and then Vancity. And then I worked at Vancity for, like I said, just over 10 years. I basically was working and putting myself through school, which can be expensive. And so I ended up having to work full time. I was promoted, or I worked my way up to an account manager 1 at the time. So doing loans and mortgages and that sort of thing. And I was working Tuesday to Saturday, I guess, and there weren't a lot of courses available that maybe even interested me. And the ones that were available were like night courses, 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And they were a lot of finance and accounting courses. So that's basically why I ended up getting a finance and an accounting degree. I also thought maybe I want to keep my doors open. And I thought maybe I'd become an accountant one day, because my neighbor was an accountant growing up, and she seemed like she had it figured out. She kind of worked for herself and picked what kind of job she wanted to do, and it seemed like a lot of autonomy there, which apparently I wanted autonomy. And I got to this point where I had worked my way up at Vancity so much that I had I had good benefits, I had good pay. And if I even wanted to go and become like an accountant, I'd have to start out as I think they call it an articling student, or I'd be taking it was almost like a $10 pay decrease or something. And I was like, oof. And I mean, that was my dream. If I was super passionate, obviously sometimes you do have to take a couple steps back in order to move forwards. But it obviously wasn't in my heart. It wasn't something I was super passionate about. So after I had my degree, it actually helped me in my career at Vancity. So again, kind of an example of how I didn't really know where my life was going with Vancity. It was just the job at the beginning of it, but it actually kind of became the core of a lot of my stories and my life endeavors after that.
I definitely want to hear more about that, but I do want to wrap up our discussion of university, because I think for a lot of Indigenous people, I don't know if it's as common now, but there are Indigenous people who feel like going to university is leaving their culture. And I think that that's something I saw a lot of my peers in high school and middle school struggle with, is this idea that you're now going to the institution, you're not going back to the community. And just even within my community, just kind of seeing the individuals who get supported through university and the individuals who didn't, the individuals who were more connected to their community, it didn't seem like they were getting the supports to go off, leave their community and get the education. And I've heard through a few other people that leaving made their community kind of look at them differently, or go like, oh, now you're off being big city, big successful person, you're not as connected to us. And so I think that it's important for listeners to understand that you're actually bringing the two back together. And through your experiences in university, you're actually bringing a lot of that knowledge and expertise back to the community to help them But the other part that I think is important that you mentioned was this idea that you kind of go down a path and now you should kind of stick with it because you already started it. And I think that there's an analogy there of like hiking a mountain. And then if you get halfway up and realize this isn't going to get me to the top, are you going to be the person who goes back down and are willing to go back down and then come back up the right way? Or are you just going to stay there? And I think I know a lot of people who got hesitant and stayed in the position that they were in because of this hesitation of why going back down the mountain is like a step down. And it's like, for the short term perhaps, but in the long term you actually end up getting all of these benefits. And so that decision to go to university and leave high school was one of those processes, it sounds like, for you to be like, you know what, I am going to take this step and move forward and take the risk. And I think that that's obviously paid dividends long term. And so I'm interested to know more about any of the courses that you took there that you found impactful or that stood out to you amongst the rest, if there were any professors there that were really insightful or offered that guidance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like, again, like in retrospect, it's helped me bring things to the community. And even just recently, there have been some community members who were like, who are these people? And they don't recognize my last name, Zetchus, right? Is my married name. So like, well, who's this person on the board? Like, why are they on our board? Like, they're not from the community. And like, that's totally fair. Candace Charlie, she's this amazing, inspiring woman as well who lives in Sts'ailes, and she was on the Dev Corp, and now she has a different role, very important role in the community. And she has her master's degree, and she uses it to benefit everyone in her community. And I feel like that is the trend now, is that more people who want to and are able to are getting that education. Because they see how it can potentially benefit themselves in the community. But I also agree that there's many people who probably are still a little intimidated, or, I mean, I would compare like the institution, like the educational institution, as similar to a financial institution. So that's something that I've struggled with, being part of the financial institution, of people not wanting to come in because there's this fear of judgment. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to like decolonize both institutions. It depends on the, how I'm feeling. University, obviously, like, I have a degree, but there are days that I felt like I bought a degree, like you go in and you're memorizing stuff to basically pass a test. And then you get your piece of paper and be like, okay, hire me because I have this piece of paper. Versus, oh, I'm super passionate about this subject. And I wish there were ways where they could implement something where there were less barriers for people to become educated or to learn about something that they're passionate about, or something that's going to help them help themselves or their community. I'm trying to think of, like, there's a lot of teachers that were there that were good. I'm thinking of economics and how, I don't know, when I was in school, I'm like, actually, like, I'm not like I'm going to be hating on the university at all, but there were some teachers, being that it was business, that it was very capitalistic. And back in the day, like, that far removed, I was like, yeah, this makes sense, capitalism, efficiencies, and all this stuff. But as I got older, my vision and my, I guess, views on that have definitely changed. I mean, I'm a business owner, so you'd think, why don't you believe in capitalism, or why do you have a beef with that? And I mean, truth be told, like, if I would have potentially started Luna Float as a cooperative kind of movement if that was something that could have been done a little bit easier. And I'm a terrible business owner. I would just do it for free and let everyone do it. But I mean, there was definitely, obviously, it helped me in different ways get the job at Vancity. It helped educate me to be part of these boards and stuff like that. It builds confidence. So there's so many reasons to do it, even if it's to learn what you like and what you don't like. I feel like now I know that is it Shirley Hardman is the head of the department in U of B that has more of a focus for Indigenous, I guess, probably students, and just curriculum and everything like that. And I don't think maybe they're even utilized as much as they should be. But I liked seeing that because I think that would make people feel more comfortable being on campus and exploring that. I think that it doesn't have to be either or. Like, you have to be cultural and part of the community, or you go to university and get higher education, that kind of thing. And I mean, higher education, like, what does that mean? It's just different education, right? I think both are valuable, and there doesn't have to be this either or situation. I think the world is constantly evolving and changing, and having more tools and having more background is always going to be good. It's like diversifying, right? Yeah, I think I know, like, as older as I get, the more I realize that I know less than I think. Yeah. When I was younger, I thought I knew a lot more. But I've always been, like, I consider myself like a lifelong learner. Like, I want to learn more, and I'm open to new ideas, and I give myself grace to be wrong and to change my views on things, yeah. Right? So I don't know if I really answered your question. I think going to university is so much more than education too. It's making connections. It's growing. And I think, like, I've also learned about my own family through education, through papers that I found, like Googling Ed Leon Sr. and Sts'ailes, and I found papers written by people who are getting their master's degree in New Zealand, even, or UBC, and they're actually, so there is like a crossover. That the institutions are also helping us rebuild our culture, and again, because a lot of our culture is oral, having it with permission recorded. And for me, I'm eternally grateful for that, because it's helping me rediscover myself as well. Yeah. So I don't know if that was kind of a roundabout way.
No, and I don't disagree that I think that the universities do struggle with connecting, because I think right now there's such a lean towards the administrative side. And I think John Haidt, who was a past guest, was kind of talking about what's going on in the US, where their administrative side has gotten so big and their support for professors has gotten so small that there isn't this feeling, to me at least, that when you're going to a university, you're getting taught by professors. It's like the professors get told what they need to tell the students, and that's how we're approached. Because to me, if UFE wanted to step up their game and they were serious about it, to me, they would start highlighting the professors and what the professors think, and have YouTube clips that are able to be posted on social media of what they're talking about in their classes. Because to me, that's the only thing missing from all of the marketing I see them doing every single day, is they're talking about how they're celebrating this day and that day and all of these days, but they're not telling, this is what you get out of a business degree. This is what makes you a different creature than when you came in, is because now you're going to be able to negotiate, you're going to be able to communicate clearly, you're going to be able to argue for better pay, you're going to be able to write papers that make arguments for more funding from funder. Like, you're going to be able to do all of these important things that are going to make the difference in your company or in your future business. To me, that's like the only thing they're not talking about, which seems crazy, because for most people, they're like examples of individuals who started businesses without having the degree. To me, they should still want to go just to get like one accounting course so they can do their books a little bit better, or one marketing course just to get a better idea. But again, the university doesn't even advocate for taking a few courses just to hone a skill or something like that, which again, to me, seems like they're missing a whole market, because they're only marketing 18 to 30-year-olds, and they don't really touch the other subsection of the population.
Yeah, and I mean, so that makes me think of a couple things. It took me a long time to get my degree, but a 4-year degree. It probably took me about 7 years because I was working and going to school. At some point later on, in like the tail end of those courses, I was older, like much older than some of the like first-year students who were coming right out of high school, and they're taking like entrepreneurship courses or different business courses. And I felt old, and I mean, I didn't have a business experience per se, in that I didn't own a business, but I had a lot of experience through Vancity and just basic finance stuff, right? Like financial literacy that we'll probably talk about later. Yeah. And so there was a disconnect, or we'd be in like a human resource class or talking about labor relations, and there's someone who sits next to me who's never actually had a job. And I'm like, how can you be learning about labor relations when you've never been in the labor force? Like, so yeah, I agree that there needs to be like that hands-on as well, like, and very like intentional, like we're learning this and this is how it applies to the real world. I think people sometimes, not that it's not the real world, but they're focused on like the higher education piece or learning about that, but kind of how does it apply to your life and yeah, that sort of thing.
That's a big problem for some professors who are only in institutions their whole career. They get their undergrad, then they get their master's, then they get their PhD, and now they're telling young people how the world is, when, in my view, they haven't experienced a sufficient amount of the pitfalls or frustrations of living in the real world that you develop through having a bad job where your employer isn't great to you, or having trying to start a business and maybe it doesn't work out, and having these real world experiences where you kind of hit a brick wall and you kind of wake up. Because I had a few professors who put like one professor was like, I'm not Indigenous, so I'm not allowed to talk about Indigenous issues. So, Aaron, why don't you talk about it? And it's like, oh, well, I actually am not educated. Like, I've taken First Nations 12 and I've taken maybe a course and a half on this, but I'm not an expert and I'm not the right person to be talking about this. But her mindset is, I'm not the person to do it. So since you're Indigenous, you are.
And that puts so much weight. Like, and I've been in that situation, and I feel shame. I feel doubt about, like, again, identity. And it's like, oh, if I don't know X, Y, and Z, and I can't just answer like that, then maybe I'm not
Indigenous.
Enough or whatever. And that's super unfair. I will give a shout out. I'm like, I hope I don't get him in trouble. But Ian Affleck comes up. He was a math teacher, and I, ironically enough, was not great at calculus math. I did decent in stats. I love math equations where you're solving a problem, like algebra, geometry, I don't know. But calculus just wasn't working for me. And I had been getting A and B's. I get to university, now it's like, okay, B's, B minuses, C pluses. I'm like, what's a C plus? Oh my goodness. But I straight up failed calculus the first semester, failed. And then another $400 plus a textbook because it changes halfway through the semester. And I take it again. I'm not telling my parents because I'm in my shame. And I take it again. I get another letter grade up, which I think was a P or a C minus or something. And I need a C plus for it to be worth anything in the overall piece of the pie, right, of my degree. So I'm like, okay, take it a third time. Yeah. Aaron, that is $1,200 just for one course. And I think I got a C. And I was just heartbroken. I'm like, was that it? That's I tried, and I mean, I didn't make it, so that's it. And you needed a C plus to be in business or in sciences. So I was like, I guess this is not cut out for me. So there's another opportunity for me to just peace out. Yeah. But I knew at that time I knew that I wanted to learn more about business, and I liked the other courses. It was just this other course that was just hanging on and causing me grief. And Ian was one of those teachers for one of those times. And I talked to him because he was a really good teacher, and I felt almost like me not getting my C plus was like I let him down, because it wasn't a reflection on his teaching. He was patient and he was thoughtful in the way he taught. So I just talked to him and I was like, I suck. What do I need to do? He helped trying to teach me on my level to grasp it. And he actually, I don't want to get him in trouble, but he let me go into calculus. He let me bypass the prereq of getting a C plus to get into the course that I needed, which was calculus 2 or whatever. And it seems kind of well, that's silly. Why, if you can't even pass or you can't get a C plus in calculus 1, why would you want to go into calculus 2, or why would they let you in? But he did, and first try, same amount of effort, and I got a B minus or a C plus in that course. And it was so much easier. It was so much better. And this was supposed to be a second level. So I don't know. But the point was that someone cared enough to listen, and it wasn't just you don't fit in this box. So, because that's so easy for someone not to give myself accolades, but when you're in that shame and you're just like, ugh, you could just, it's easy enough to just slip into the background and no one would notice someone dropping out. Like, I'm sure lots of people do it. So yeah, I think that was a pivotal moment for me that someone believed in me.
Yeah.
And that was, it was a barrier, and yeah.
I think that that's a really important story, because I think that that happens to so many students, and we don't talk about our failures. We only talk about our GPAs and how great they are, and try and show off that side of us, that when somebody does do less successful in a course, that we feel that sense of judgment and discouragement, and then we don't want to say anything to anyone because we feel like they're going to see it. And I think that for people like Rebecca, I think one of the issues is being able to share that with your family, because they don't even know what it means to take a university course, let alone what it means to not do well in a course. And so they're not able to be understanding and be able to say, you know what, like, to me, it's really important that I always stress that grades really, for the most part, don't matter at all, because it's a perception, and you should measure somebody, and if it was possible, measure somebody on their effort to understand the information more than trying to figure out whether or not they checked a box, because a person can continue to develop over time if they're encouraged to do so, just like it sounds like with this course. If you had been judged based on your effort and time put into it, rather than purely based on a mark on an exam, which is somewhat arbitrary as well, because I'd have professors who would tell us exactly what all the questions are going to be before an exam, and then I'd have other professors who would say, we're not going to tell you, or they'd tell us, and none of that information was on the exam. So there's this vast inconsistency with what professors expect on an exam, what their mindset is, because I had one professor who had 12 essay questions and have at her 2 hours, and it's like, where should I focus more of my time? What's more important? How much information do you need for this question? Like, all of these questions. And so for him to say, you don't understand this information, it's like, no, you asked broad questions and I did the best I could with the information.
No, you're definitely, you're open to interpretation. I liked open-ended ones because I could massage, my answer, to describe that, hey, I don't really remember what that word was because I haven't memorized it, but I get the general feel of it, and like, here's what I know. So I would just like dump like all of my brain goo onto the page. And that worked sometimes for biology. I at least get like half marks because they're like, they could tell that I kind of generally knew, but I just forgot a couple of words. Or philosophy, I did awesome with that because I was able to just kind of go down there. English, I came across that was one of I didn't care for. It was an opinion piece that you had to write, and I feel like my teacher just graded me because I didn't like my opinion, and I was like, rude and discouraging. But it's not just one person or one scenario. It's having that help throughout your journey as well. Like, I remember, I carried a lot of pressure on myself, and I remember even in elementary school, having like a bad grade or like getting something that wasn't a gold star, and feeling sick, like I was going to be in so much trouble when I got home. And especially my dad, I was kind of scared, and I remember him just being like, did you try your hardest? Like, did you try your best? And I was like, well, yeah, obviously. And he was like, that's all I'm ever going to ask from you. And like, it's enough of a moment that like I'll remember that, but it didn't cure me. Like, it didn't just like, oh, okay, my dad says if I try my best. Like, I still is that, okay, well, I did try my best, and it still wasn't good enough. So now what? And you just have to. Those are gifts when you have those moments, but it can't just be one moment and now you're going to be fine the rest of.
And I think that that's important for people to grapple with, because I think that that is one of the milestones of becoming an adult that right now, I think we have a really bad sense of what becoming an adult is, because it's looked on as like all the problems of being an adult with none of the benefits. And I think that that's because we overlook the value of family and community and responsibility and connection and obligations to your community is like part of the benefit to me of community. And I think we lose that sometimes, because I think to that point, it's really important that we do realize that you can put in 100% effort and not go your way. That's a part of life. Just like sometimes you'll put in, but the benefit is that the odds are always better if you put in the effort. That it might not always go your way, but at least there's a chance it could go your way. But if you don't put in any effort, the odds that it's going to go your way are very, very low, because you haven't done anything to kind of earn it or set yourself up for that opportunity. But moving forward a little bit, because you talked a little bit about philosophy, I agree with you. I think capitalism has plenty of problems, but to me, it's the only system we found that actually works. So I'm interested in what your thoughts are on capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not just like down with capitalism. Like, I feel like it can just, like, the ugly side of it when people, it's like max efficiency and they'll do anything for that extra dollar, and that's like at the detriment of other people's welfare. I liked economics, and that's kind of where that stems from, like that capitalism is the most efficient, free market, Adam Smith, all of that stuff. The invisible hand.
What's the invisible hand?
Invisible hand is basically like it's part of Adam Smith, the philosophy of economics being that a free market, like if you just operate in the free market, that the invisible hand is like the supply and demand, that if you just leave it be, like the businesses that do things the best are going to like be the ones that will get the most money and that sort of thing, that you don't have to do anything, like I guess like that would be the antithesis of socialism, that if you affect or if you implement something, then you're trying to control it, whereas you don't need to control it. Capitalism is magic and it will just all work itself out, when in actuality, like our system right now, like what we live in, it's a little bit combination of both, right? What I would say is I'm just starting to read Indigenomics by Carol Ann Hilton, I think is her last name. She's amazing, and if you ever get a chance to hear her speak, it's awesome. And so I've just begun, like as a new mom, unfortunately having time to read in my own time is kind of hard, but I struggled with, on one hand, people asking us questions. Tell us about how it is to be an Indigenous person, and like you're supposed to come up with this canned response, like it's just a one size fits all, and that's not true. But there's also things that I like learning, that it's like, for instance, like wealth. So you ask, well, what does wealth mean to you? And that might mean like savings in the bank, but very often in our culture, it's about giving back and reciprocity. If you want to call it wealth, but like you're doing well in life if you're able to provide for more people, right? So I thought that was pretty big, right? Because a lot of times with true capitalism, people are like, their wealth is the numbers in the bank, and it's not what they're doing with that money, and that overlap is kind of this reciprocity piece, and I guess philosophy of Vancity that I thought was really cool, being that it's a financial cooperative. They didn't want that profit isn't a bad word, that money isn't bad, it's what you can do with it and the good that you can do with it. I almost had the opportunity to go to Italy with Vancity, Bologna in particular, and they have this community that I can't remember what the professor's name is, but basically they think of the economy like there's like Ferrari and I think a Ducati production plants out there, and if one is like, they're competitors, but they also work collaboratively because they believe that like together like they will rise, kind of thing. And so the economy they would describe as whether it's like a sum or a product, meaning that like if we're thinking of ones and zeros, and like a zero sounds so bad, is someone who's maybe not contributing to the economy. For us, we typically think of it as like 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and that's like the sum, plus 0. Well, you're not adding anything. Whereas if you look at it as a product where 1 times 1 times 1 times 0, okay, as soon as you times a 0, everything's 0. So it's, again, we're all in this together. So if there's like a dip in employment, they'll actually provide different kinds of tools for people to still contribute, and it's not necessarily like financially driven, like it's more of like making sure that everyone has a certain like style of life, right? That everyone is taken care of. And just that the trusting that, I don't know, I think there's this feeling that people are just inherently lazy and that they'll just like like if you give them a handout, that's like they'll just sit back and take that. Whereas like people want to be part of a community. It's more about connection and not that. So with this, it's not a handout. They're just like, here, like this is where you'll fit into the community now, and they find spots for people, and I think that's important. So yeah, I think there's a lot of inefficiencies, unfortunately, with capitalism too. Mostly just like the exploitation of people and our environment. I get what you're saying. Like I get that there's the efficiencies. Like if I'm really good at this, like then that's just the thing. It's like in theory, and that's what they teach you in school, the theory. But in practicality, what does that actually look like, right? Like if I'm really good at doing something and you don't like doing it, or you're not really great at it, then it probably would make sense for you to let me do that, and then like, you know, and then either pay me for that, or we trade services and stuff like that. So like, I get the general idea and believe in that efficiency piece, but I just think that we've, as a people, as a society, have exploited it too much. Like where it's like, well, I can do that cheaper, and cheaper is better because then there's more margin. But it's like, at what cost, right? Like when do you eventually say that doesn't make sense?
I agree, and I think that that's one thing that I was surprised by when I started the podcast, because one arm of it that I was hoping to utilize more is I have this audio and video equipment, and so in my mind when I was starting it, I was like, well, if I do have a small business owner on, what can I bring value to marketing them? Like I have all of this great equipment. We can go into your shop. We can shoot a couple of different takes of your store. We can tie that into the podcast. We can either make that its own ad video that you can put on your Facebook and stuff to market yourself in a new way that you might not have the audio and video equipment or know how to use it or want to learn about it. I wouldn't need to charge for that because it wouldn't take too much of my time. But this could be something that benefits their business to market them in a very cost-effective way. And the response I got was nothing. Nobody was that interested. The people that I mentioned it to, and I was like, hey, this is how I could see this kind of working. We would record the podcast, and then we can take parts of what you talk about. We can voice over the video footage. This is how I see it. And the response was like, oh, yeah, sure, if you want to. And it was like, oh, that's all on me now. Like you don't want to like you don't want to try and work collaboratively to bring this about. And I think that one of the side effects is people get so siloed, carrying their own weight every single day, trying to run their business, trying to make sure that all the details, that I'm sure you get as a business owner, lots of people who come in and say, I've got the next best thing for your business and you just give me a few minutes. And they get so many pitches over time that I think that they end up, and it's always like a fee. It's always like and for the small price of $400 a month, we can do this. And I think that that's caused people to feel siloed and to do their business, and whoever they hire, they have to pay, and it becomes so independent that they start to forget that there are people out there that are just willing to support because they believe in the work you're doing, and that doesn't have to come with any strings attached. And I think that that's what capitalism taken too seriously on the small micro level causes people to just be like, this is my business, nobody else cares. If I don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, so I'll just do it, and there's no point in asking this person to help, or there's no chance that they're going to do this for a fair, reasonable price, because we are always grinding so much. And with the podcast, like I know most people have no idea what goes into the background of it, which is okay with me, but I can see when you're running a whole business, you've got staff, you've got so many different arms and legs that you're dealing with, that it's hard for you to imagine that something could be so simple and easy and could be an exciting thing. Because I think that sometimes small business owners lose passion for what they're doing because they've been doing it for so long and gotten this jaded feeling of like, customers don't know what I'm going through, like my staff don't know what I'm going through, nobody understands what I'm going through, and like it drives people to lose motivation. So can we move in a little bit into the financial literacy piece?
Sure.
And what you see from that? Because one of the biggest frustrations I have right now is feeling like Indigenous communities are not getting the financial literacy that I think could really give them a leg up. Because I've spoken to at least my chief in council, and I know that our community members have received money, but they don't know what to do with it. And then they ended up spending it, and now all of that money is now gone. And there wasn't that education piece. And I know that my community is looking into getting more education, but what has that been like for you?
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, kind of what we were talking about, like sometimes you're in a position, and financial literacy it makes sense and I'm passionate about it, but it's about the system that we're in as well. So it's like when I'm going into a First Nations community, you're not coming in preaching about this is how you need to do things, because it's different. You're just more educating on this is like what I know as part of the system, and this is what can help you in that system. Like, for instance, the credit bureau, like that's a real thing, and you know, like you can ignore it, but like that's a thing if you want to go to a financial institution, or you're going to a car dealership and you want a car. Like those are things that to navigate that world. That being said, so yeah, if someone were to receive a lump sum of money, there's a lot of different questions we would also ask just to see what, you know, help them reach their goals. But there's probably, you know, the people who typically facilitate financial literacy workshops and come from a financial institution, they're going to be talking about RSPs and tax-free savings and savings and savings and investing. When we had already talked about the reciprocity piece or the generosity piece of like, I'm wealthy and I feel my most wealthiest when I'm giving back, or when, and so maybe that's buying everyone presents, and we would say, well, that's not financially responsible. So who are we to like put that judgment on them? But if you get to sit down and again, there's like acknowledgements, like if there's that reciprocity piece that they've helped everyone and they know that it's coming back. You're not helping someone because you're expecting something back in return, but you know that you've taken care of this family, and that if you ever needed help, that they would take care of you. And that's something that I'm really proud that Vancity is actually kind of acknowledging, that sometimes people who are living on reserve aren't able to build the same amount of wealth in terms of like assets, cash, having equity in homes. That's something I'm working on right now with different like on reserve mortgages and lending and stuff. But they just didn't have that opportunity. And you know, so seeing that there's other valuable assets, for lack of a better word, in having community connections, in having that sort of thing, right? So I did a financial literacy workshop with Stella Community Futures and Vancity at Chilliwack a couple of times, and I actually there's kind of two different arms that we do. One is just your basic financial literacy, you know, trying to demystify or make like banking not so scary or intimidating, and things that often people are like, I never learned that in school. I wish we learned that in school instead of XYZ. Like, why didn't we learn about how to, I mean, maybe this is a little old school, but like write a check or use online banking, or the difference between a checking and a savings plan, or a credit bureau and credit cards, and what does that actually mean? You know, often I see people after the aftermath of like, I racked up all my credit cards and what, this isn't free money. And, you know, it just, you know, having that piece. But what I was in Chilliwack for was actually what they call Each One Grow One. And that was more of financial literacy for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Yeah. And which is kind of more of I preferred kind of going down that route because it was just because you work with passionate people who they have an idea or they have a passion, and then you help them they can still do the passion piece, but like, let me help you do cash flow projection, because that's what you're going to need if you need financing, kind of thing, right? And just help them navigate that to help them reach their goals. Not everyone's going to have the same goals, and you can't assume that everyone does. Yeah. But I think the main takeaway is just empowering people. And that's the part of the education where it's not just even teaching them, it's more just letting them, like, here's the information in an easy, digestible way, and then they can use it either to feel more confident to step in the bank and ask for what they need, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, because I think that it's important that individuals are just at least given the information so they can get started, because I think that that's so lacking, especially with our education system, is that I don't think we're given these basic tools that just allow us to consider all of our options. And I think that is something I think a lot about, because there are arguments in support of keeping the reserve system, and there are arguments in contrast, and I think one of the detriments is that they don't have the same level of regular access to financial institutions, to just being in the community where things are taking place, where you can hear from a lawyer or hear from an accountant, or run into your bank teller at the store and ask a quick question. And that disconnect always concerns me, because I think that it puts my community on a worse footing. and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't give us the same opportunities, because that's why I wanted to have Tim McAlpine on, is because he's this great voice for entrepreneurship, and those are the voices that I don't think reach community regularly
Mm-hmm.
enough, where it's just in your mind. And I think I just imagine this hypothetical Indigenous person living on reserve and having this brilliant idea and telling
Mm-hmm.
everyone about it, and then being like, oh, sure, Gronny's got another brilliant idea, and like, he's
Mm-hmm.
going to go become a millionaire. And like that teasing when other people don't understand what your vision is
Mm-hmm.
just kind of comes when you're like, when I was starting the podcast, I was so nervous to tell anyone, because I'm just imagining what other people are thinking in their head
Yeah.
of what I'm doing and the worst possible analysis. And so it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
voice what you're doing when you're starting something like that out. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good point about reciprocity, is that that is part of Indigenous communities. But I think one other way that they could look at it is, if you're able to build up these assets, they give returns, so you can be generous for a longer span of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, or generations, right? Like a lot of like wealth planning, investing, even like life insurance stuff is, that succession planning or leaving a legacy, right? Like leaving something for your family as well. So no, exactly. And I think that just, you have to build that trust with whoever you're talking about, Indigenous or not. Like across from you, if you're facilitating financial literacy workshops, not assume that everyone has the same goals, but no, it is important. And I think that's the perfect way to put it, is that if that's your goal, well, we can even do that. Like, you don't have to just immediately do it now. We can build a plan and then help you execute that. And I know there's, like, I think it's amazing that you're going to law school. Like, I feel like the more Indigenous people that can be in those kind of positions, I mean, I like to think there's that inherent trust in general of like, oh, or hope that, okay, maybe this person will kind of get where I'm coming from more than maybe a non-Indigenous lawyer. And I know we often are looking for like accountants who understand different tax implications, and even within Vancity, with trying to help create mortgage programs, there had been barriers of finding appraisers and lawyers that didn't just devalue the land right off the bat because they didn't understand the value or how to do it. So yeah, it's finding like a team of people that are going to help you, who understand what your goals are.
Let's talk a little bit about what Vancity is to you, because it is unique from a bank like TD, CIBC, and then let's move into a little bit of the mortgages, because I think that is a really relevant point that, again, differentiates Indigenous communities from non-Indigenous communities in that how the land is dealt with. So can you tell us a little bit about Vancity and how it might be unique from other financial institutions?
Right. So, I mean, Vancity is BC's, I believe, still the largest credit union in BC. Credit unions are different than banks in that they're membership owned and driven. So they're a financial cooperative, meaning you buy shares and you become a member. You're not a customer, which might seem somewhat insignificant, but basically it's about following the money. Where does the money go? So if you were a client at TD, for instance, or if you go into Vancity, it probably looks the same. You walk in, there's the tellers, there's some offices. It's going to look the same. The transaction's probably very much the same. It's more about what they do with their profits. So their profits go. You can buy TD shares, right? So on the stock market or in mutual funds, and so it's publicly traded. So their profits go back to their shareholders, basically. And same thing with financial cooperatives, except that the shareholders are typically the members, so the people who are utilizing the services as well. And it stays in our community that way. So not saying one's better than the other, but that's the difference, right? And Vancity is only located in British Columbia because they really just focus, and that's how credit unions typically operate. They're usually very geographically connected, I guess.
I think we can say that credit unions are likely better because they're more likely to act in the best interest of the individual in their business than a bigger business that's more focused on shareholders, right?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, again, the end service, depending on what you want, if you're just depositing money or, it's hard to say. Yeah. But I've only had growing up, my first bank account was at Envision, which is a credit union as well. So, yeah, I'm definitely team credit unions for sure. yeah, and then so that's basically the difference, or what
And what have
Vancity
your
is.
roles been like within Vancity? What has that been like for you to start as a bank teller? What is that experience kind of like? And then moving up in your role, what has that
Sure.
been like?
So being a bank teller was just like a lot of customer service, right? You're seeing a lot of people and you're having those quick, short conversations, but you typically see the same people, so you build that relationship, and you get to. It can be like the how's the weather kind of thing, but often you're seeing these people and you end up seeing them grow. You see their kids grow, and you kind of have this intimate knowledge or relationship with them in a way, because you're seeing them deposit money, and you see people like deposit money from like a job, so you kind of know like their job history, their education history, maybe some of their struggles, and then to a degree, people come in, maybe they're working through an estate, so someone's passed away or they're getting married, so you go to a credit union or I say bank, but financial institution, at kind of different really pivotal moments of your life, hypothetically. So you kind of end up getting to know people on that level. And then becoming an account manager, it slowed things down a little bit. I wasn't seeing as many people in a day, but I was having longer conversations with those people. So then again, you're going down another level, and people are coming in looking for advice, and whereas like be on the front line as a teller, more transactional, right? They're telling you just put this check in, and then you still want to give them some advice. Hey, do you have plans for this? Do you want to maybe talk to a financial advisor or talk to an account manager about this? So it's a team effort, really, to help people navigate those times of their lives. So then as account manager, you kind of know a lot about, or a little about a lot. I'm not licensed, so I wouldn't really discuss mutual funds. I could talk that they exist, and that maybe that's something that you'd want to talk to a specialist about. But I was doing loans, lines of credits, mortgages, and so that's the lending piece. And then the basic R.E.S.T tax-free savings and term deposits, and just helping educate people on the differences. I really ended up liking, we'd have to do like potentially consolidation loans. I kind of like doing them because it was a great opportunity to educate people and help like put them on their path, like kind of redirect their path, and again, make more kind of an efficient plan for them to reach their goals moving forward by like reducing their debt ultimately, or reducing their debt load, and helping their cash flow and stuff like that. So
can you tell us a little bit more about debt consolidation? Because I think that we have a lot of young listeners who may be working themselves towards a place where they need to consider consolidating their debt, but haven't even considered it as like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's just being aware of what kind of tools you're using. So like credit cards aren't bad, it's how you use them. I like to get the points. I like to use the ease of using a credit card, and then I just have one bill to pay at the end of the month. I highly recommend paying your credit card off in full each month. It's usually not a very good interest rate. That's all relative, but credit cards are usually 19%. So if you can avoid paying interest, that would be great. And just finding someone that you trust, that you can ask questions. And like, for me, my space was like, there's no dumb questions, ask me anything. It's better to know than to, that shame of like, oh, I'm embarrassed, I don't know. I had someone whose husband got a truck loan and thought he got a really good deal, and it was like almost 20%. Like he almost bought a new truck on because he didn't have good credit. And so that they justified then increasing his interest rate, and that's true. So it's like, why does my credit matter? Well, if you want lending, like that's a potential reason you might be deemed as riskier, because they don't know you. So like they are kind of, I don't want to say they're judging, but they use the credit bureau as a tool to navigate what kind of products they can offer you and at what interest rate. Whether that's fair or not, that's how it happens. And so I just want people to have that knowledge so that they can navigate and plan for the best. I would say, establish a relationship with someone at your financial institution. It's free. You sit down and you can have someone's like an hour of their undivided attention and get help navigating your finances, so you're doing things smarter. I had someone who, you're carrying a little bit of a balance on your credit card, and you see on your bill, minimum payment, $50. Okay, well, that's not too bad. Or sometimes it's even lower. It's like $20. And I had someone who, maybe it's like this perfectionism where they're just like, oh, well, I didn't want to just pay $20, but I knew in like next month I'd be able to pay like 100. So they just skipped paying the 20 now. And they're like, oh, I'll pay 100 next month. And it was like, no, that's not how credit cards work. That's your minimum payment. Like, you have to make that payment or else you skipped a payment, basically. And like, in their head, well, I'm going to pay him 100 next month. That's better than paying him $20 now. And $20 next month, right? Like, that's only $40, Nina, do the math. And it's like, okay, I get in theory what you're saying, but that's not how it works. And now you're actually like wrecking your credit bureau because it's showing as a late payment. And so that's just, again, no judgment, kind of, we can joke about it. But moving forward, like, now and you're going to pay the $20 on time because you want to preserve your credit bureau. And then it's like, when you're buying stuff and you don't have the money to pay it off, for instance, what's the best route to go? Like, maybe you have your car breaks down and you need the car to get to work. So you're hit with a large bill, you put it on your credit card, but should it stay there? Does that make the most sense? Or maybe you should get a loan. What's the difference? And why would I get one product over the other, right? So come in, talk, find out if you don't know those answers, or what like a line of credit is and that sort of thing. So consolidation loans, why I liked it was, say you're out living life, you got a couple of credit cards, because especially when you turn 19, all of a sudden it seems like they know, and they're coming in the woodwork and they're offering you all these great 0%, like read the fine print, right? So maybe you have a couple of credit cards, and now you're learning that you're paying the minimum payment, but you're not getting ahead with the minimum payment. You're not paying it down. It's kind of the never plan. Maybe you have a car loan too, or another thing that attracts people are those furniture loans, or
easy home.
Exactly, yeah. And no payments until, and then all of a sudden you're hit with this payment. And anyway, so then you're just feeling like that's cash flow, is when all of your paycheck comes in, and then, the credit card's taking this and that loan's taking that, and it's just like, what do I have left? And I'm also supposed to save? How does this work, right? And you're not getting ahead, and it feels like this weight on you. And so for people who get to that point where they're like help, like, I don't know where my money is going, or I don't have enough to feel like I'm living comfortably, or I don't have enough for my goals of going to school, or for my goals to purchase a new car, come in, figure it out. So what a consolidation loan technically does would be paying out your debts and consolidating it to one payment, because it's like death by 1,000 cuts sometimes, where you have and if they're different interest rates, right? So if you can pay off debt that has 19% with a loan that's only 7%, financially that makes sense, right? That's basic math. It doesn't matter, I failed calculus, I know that math works. And so the idea is kind of twofold. You're paying down potentially higher interest rate debt at a lower interest rate, and you're also typically freeing up a little bit of cash flow so that they can have some breathing room, or maybe we're using a little bit of that freed capital or cash to pay down the loan faster. So again, a credit card is revolving, and that's why we call it like the never plan. If you just keep on putting money towards, you don't have that end in sight. And sometimes it even says, legally they actually had to add this to the statement, where it will tell you, if you pay the minimum payment, you will pay this down in 21 years, kind of thing, right? So look at that if you want to be depressed. So with a loan, it's a X amount, like, this is the interest rate, and it's going to be paid off. If you keep on making this X amount of payments, it'll be paid off in 3 years, or it'll be paid off in 4 years. So there's that light at the end of the tunnel. This is a plan, so long as you don't kind of fall back into potentially some of those pitfalls. Like, this is your plan, and this is like how you're going to get out of it, kind of thing, right? So
this is a really important question I want to ask, because I know that for a certain subsection of the population, we treat people as if, and maybe there's a better way to phrase this, who are some of the people who need these consolidation loans? Because I think we have a bad habit of thinking one subsection of the population are the ones with all the money problems, and the people on Promontory or the people on Chilliwack Mountain don't have those problems because they're financial experts, because they've got this big beautiful car. And I think that that's an error we often make, is that we treat the person with the crazy Jaguar as if they've got all of their finances figured out, and the person driving the old Nissan Altima 2002 is the crazy person who's got all the problems. So can you tell us just broadly
It's just that it's broad. Like I mean, I've been out of the game for a few years, right? So, but you're totally right. It's all ages. It really does cross a lot of different demographics. Yeah, having a fancy car or boat. I mean, from my standpoint, because of the job that I've had, it's funny because yeah, you're right. Most people would be like, "Oh, they've got it all figured out. They must be very wealthy." And from my point of view, I'm always like, "Oof, I wonder, like, are those paid off, or are they paying loans?" And like, I've seen where maybe it's an illness, or you just lose a job, and all of a sudden that life is like you can't afford it anymore. So yeah, whereas the person like I drive a 2008 Mazda that is like pretty rickety right now. So not saying that my life is great and I'm super wealthy because I drive a crappy car. That's not necessarily the case either. But definitely there are people who live more, I guess, like moderately or like frugally and financially. Like, yeah, you might think, oh, they don't know about finance. It's like, oh, they do, and like they, like their lifestyle is different, right? So no, you can't judge a book by its cover. By any means, but I do think that unfortunately people who there's like this cycle of poverty as well, where maybe they had less means to educate themselves about finance. It's like that kind of like, if you have enough, there's chargeback fees at banks, so you didn't have enough money and something bounced, and then the bank charges you a fee, and it just feels like adding insult to injury. Like, I didn't have money and now you're charging me more money because I didn't have money. Like yeah. And I get it, and I understand why they do it to a degree, but often, like, it's not funny. Like, often there's those kinds of things where, yeah, the people who need help the most are actually getting penalized.
Can we talk a little bit about Money Mart and those types of businesses, because those are heartbreaking. I think that they shouldn't even exist. I think that they are purely predatory, and I think something so vulturous should not exist in our communities, because they do go after the most vulnerable. They're not going after the people on Promontory or the people in Chilliwack Mountain. They're looking for the people who are already trying to survive with small amounts of money each month.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Vancity still does it, but they actually created a product that was to try to help. I mean, I guess one way to say it is steal business from them, but to basically offer an alternative to people who are going to money marts and stuff like that. It was called a fair and fast loan, because those were kind of the barriers that people, when you go to get an official loan, we're going to pull your credit. It's going to take time. You need income verification. And they're like, yeah, no, I need this money now because I have to pay rent or I have to buy groceries. And, those were limitations that were on us. So I just love, being part of an organization that listens and looks and is like, okay, well, this is how we can fill the need. Are the interest rates higher than a regular loan? Yep, it is. But it's not the predatory rates that, like you're saying.
Because they can be like 200, 300, 400%, right?
Uh-huh, yeah.
For like a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're not getting ahead, you're getting behind, and again, it's quick and easy. So if you're already feeling maybe embarrassed, it's like, okay, well, at least I just go in and out, and like I don't have to, do anything. Whereas, if I don't want to see Nina and I have to sit down and talk to her and
admit all of these things
and show them all these things. But often push comes to shove at the very end, and they're like, they can't get ahead, and then they finally do have to come, and it's like, oh, I wish you came to me from the beginning, because it would have been easier, but that's fine, and come at least at some point, right? But yeah, exactly. Like there's so many different things that lead up to what can put someone in that position, right? And I can go back to their families. Access to wealth, family helping them, bailing them out, kind of thing. Access to, again, that's kind of, we can segue into the mortgage thing, is because that's, a lot of people are able to access equity from their home to help. That's an easy consolidation loan if you can use a huge asset to offset it.
Before we get there, I want to ask about small, like, car purchases or car leases, and what your thoughts are on those, because I think I've taken a little bit of flack for saying I don't support them almost ever, because I think that they put people who might have a $20 an hour job, and then they're like, oh, like, I can get this car for $300 a month or $250 a month. But now you have this contract with this institution, and now you have this long-term commitment. So it makes it more difficult if you want to switch jobs, if you want to focus more on university, if you want to start you're an entrepreneur and you want to start a new thing. Like, I can just see so many potential negatives down almost any path that you want to go down with a big car loan, that to me I can almost never see, unless you have a big stockpile of cash and you could pay it out at any time and you're just choosing not to and it's a low interest rate. That's like the only time I can see it. But I see almost all of my friends with cars that have loans on them and jobs that really don't support that type of financial decision, yet their parents support them, they sign the contract with them, and it just feels like there's multiple generations that don't understand the long-term risks, because the argument that I've heard against me is, well, it's a safe vehicle. I don't have to stress about getting stuck on the side of the road. And all I think is, well, how much is BCAA a year? It's like, what, $100 to guarantee that somebody's going to be there on the side of the road with you to help you out?
Exactly. And I mean, in my role at the financial institution, you can't impose your beliefs on someone, but there are definitely people who I would have consider friends, where I'm having a pretty real, candid conversation where I'm like, why? Like, what are you? And it's like this entitlement potentially, or I need this reward, I deserve this, that kind of thing. But it's also about seeing like the long term. So there's definitely times where I was just like, why is that your goal? And it might be an ego thing, it might be a lifestyle thing. And again, you're trying not to impose any judgment on that, but from a financial standpoint, it's like, does that actually make sense? And I think a good example would be, I would see a lot of young, typically guys, who were going to Alberta working on the oil rigs. And as soon as they came back, it was like, okay, like you could just almost have like the checklist, right? Like they got the big truck and all their toys, and then oh no, something's changed in your life, and now all of a sudden, this is not as comfortable making those payments and stuff like that, and you have to reevaluate, right? So sometimes you can give people your advice and show them like that alternative way of thinking of things, but sometimes it's not gonna really sink in until they have to experience like making a choice, right? Of, I can't afford this anymore, and that's a touchy subject, telling someone like what to do with their money, or maybe not their money, but I mean, they're not spending their money on buying the vehicle because they're getting a loan, but they're using their money to pay the loan down, right? There's also the whole asset thing of like, when you buy a brand new vehicle, like as soon as it leaves the lot, the value of it goes down, or it decreases typically, right? So again, it's about education. So I definitely would have those conversations with people in a non-judgmental way, of just being like, these are some of the things, and because there are pros and cons to leasing as well, like especially if you're an entrepreneur, people lease vehicles, write-offs, that sort of thing, or if you're using it for marketing. And again, I don't pretend to be an expert in all those things, but I think you use the word like kind of being in control of your finances, and you'll be more, I guess, able to adapt or be agile in a world that is ever changing. So you might have that job now, but you might not have it down the road, or something might change, or you have a baby. Like there's different priorities change. Or if you lose your job, now that vehicle's become more of a burden, or that payment has become more of a burden, right?
Especially if there's like a financial crash or something like that. So can you quickly just describe how an individual might experience that? Because I think the big pitfall for a lot of people is they treat the 2008 crash or recessions in general as if that doesn't apply to them because they have a normal job. They're not a part of the stock market. They're not a part of these big investment organizations. So how does that impact me, the regular everyday individual? And I think that we do a terrible job of educating people on what a recession looks like. What did the 2008 recession mean? Who was responsible for that? Like, I feel like we don't do a great job of delivering that information to the common individual who's just going about their day.
I always think that the best way to educate is through stories, right? And luckily, like, I feel like I'm old enough now that I actually have stories of my own, or cautionary tales, as I like to call them. Or if you don't, like, use someone else's as well, like with permission, or, don't use their name kind of thing. But so I actually bought an apartment. I was still living at home with my parents, and I bought an apartment. I think I was 22. I had just started working at Vancity and had some money saved up, and I wanted to be a landlord. I thought that would be a good idea. And I bought in 2006, end of 2007 maybe. And interest rates were like almost 6%. And so that was, again, I didn't know what was good or bad. My parents back in the day like had double-digit mortgage rates before, right? So I'm like, this is great. No, and so yeah, the market basically crashed in 2008, and I was like, what? I thought real estate, you can't lose. It always just goes up, right? Like, very naive. I ended up holding on to that like investment. It was more of a lesson than an investment. It was, learning kind of like while I was going to school, I was learning that piece, but in real life, I was learning lots of things through being a landlord and real estate owner, I guess. And different like words of wisdom, like you only lose like when you sell, like in mutual funds even, or your stocks, like when it's down, you're like, oh, I want to sell, like I've stopped this like ride, I want off. But if you sell, like that's when you're actually realizing the loss, right? So if you can hold on to it and ride the proverbial waves over time, and again, there's different reasons why people invest. But so I tell people that, like, no, interest rates change, and like just because like what you know to be true, especially if you're younger, that's like no hit on younger people. It's just like you've had less experience, hypothetically, of time to experience those like different interest rates. If you're only looking at the short snippet of time of like what the stock market was doing, so just knowing that it has impacted people, and it maybe doesn't impact people all the same way though either, right? So I'd use that as a cautionary tale that, some people buy and then all of a sudden, like, the market jumps up and they have all this equity and they think they're the smartest person in the world because they did this. And it's like, okay, but it's not always like that. And I think it's interesting because my parents are kind of different. My dad was very like planning for the future and being somewhat frugal, not doom and gloom, but just kind of like, level-headed, I guess. Whereas my mom's very generous and maybe kind of a little bit like, if it wasn't for him, maybe would be a little bit less as planned, and like, more just like, if you got money, you like spend it and like share it with your friends and just, keep on living. But like, whereas my dad's like, plan for a rainy day and, that sort of thing. And so I try to take both of those things, because you can't just, like, there's no point of just being so frugal that you're not experiencing any joy in life. But I think it's a balance. It's finding the balance that works for you, and listening to people of different ages, of different backgrounds, because they're all going to have different experiences and their perceptions might be different, right?
Yeah. One thing I'm really worried about right now is hyperinflation, because we're getting a lot of hints that that's either coming or that we might be a little bit more exposed than other countries. Mm-hmm. And my concern is that we're talking about it perhaps in ivory towers in financial institutions, mm-hmm. but the people that this really impacts is First Nations communities, people already in poverty who are already mm-hmm. on a fixed income. Those are the people who impact if hyperinflation occurs. Those are the people who are going to be impacted the worst. And I don't know if you've heard, but I always hear stories of the average Canadian is like, they couldn't get together $200 in like 2 weeks if mm-hmm. they needed to pay off an extra bill or something like that. Yeah. And so to me, we're getting a lot of indications that we might have over the next 10 years some mm-hmm. real financial hardships. And I don't think that that's A, being talked about enough, but B, being shared with the people who need to be preparing the most for something like that to occur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's very real. Yeah, to assume that everyone experiences the same is definitely not true at all.
Can you tell us about leasehold land and how Vancity's working with them? Because I know I can share a little bit of information on how Alpine is involved in that work. So
so basically, a lot of the times when you live on reserve, it's like all the homes are like owned by the band, and people acquire homes different ways. Growing up in Chilliwack, I know it'd be like, you drive through the reserve and there's like, oh, like they don't take care of their properties, or they, I don't know. And it's just like, it's different. It's different than when you have a mortgage and you're able to be like, oh, my roof's leaking. I need to like most people, I mean, don't just have like, say 10 grand to like buy a new roof, but they're able to access it because they own the home and they have access to the equity. And it's pretty cut and dry to do that when you go into a bank. It's like, here's my deed. Okay, you don't actually do that, but you pull like the land, like the title and stuff like that, right? And they know, like lenders know how to do that. When you live on the reserve and you don't, like, you know, everyone knows that's your home, but like you go to the bank, they're like, well, can you prove that it's your home? Like, do you have like, yeah, the title and that sort of thing? And it's like, well, no. And, you know, how does that work? So kind of what was happening, like my background would be, there's lots of development, like Chilliwack's surrounded by ALR at this point, and a lot of reserve, like leased land. Everything else is being developed and scooped up. And so it's a huge opportunity. And so we were seeing community members who were getting CPs, so that's like certificate of possession, on their land. And this is all, sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, because a lot of communities are getting land code. So they're taking back control of their communities and their land, and they're creating their own rules.
Indian
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So the land code is enabling them to make more of these rules and helping their community members. So we were seeing, say a community member had this plot of land and then they were developing, and because again, there's a huge need for it, right? Supply and demand. And so they would develop, and then they were selling these townhomes and that sort of thing, and they were making themselves and their family some money, and there's nothing wrong with that. This would become leased land, right? It's still on reserve, but most of these homes are being sold to non-Indigenous people who need a house. They're coming out from the city, they're moving to Chilliwack. So similar to like cultists, like there's leased land, but that's like crown land or whatever. So I was like, that's great. Not all FIs can lend on leased land. They have to have approved the head lease. So for instance,
financial
institutions, yeah, sorry, jargon. So for instance, like Vancity, there's a lot of land up at Cultus that we don't mortgage off. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the property. We just haven't gone through the steps to have our legal department approve the head lease. Like a lot of the Cultus, like it's like 100-year lease, that sort of thing, right?
Sts'ailes, right?
No, not even Indigenous lands.
Okay.
Like there's like, crown lands around the lake itself that, I mean, it is Sts'ailes land, but you know, but it's not designated reserve lands for legal purposes. So owned by non-Indigenous people. So yeah, the crown would be like the head lease, basically, like I'm not sure exactly what the head lease is, but this isn't like non-Indigenous. But I'm just using it as an example. So we don't mortgage there, but maybe TD does, or maybe Envision does. So sometimes you have to shop around that way when you're looking for a mortgage. I've had people at the 11th hour say, I was moving from Surrey to Chilliwack, and then all of a sudden they said that that wasn't an approved development. And it just happened to be what we're calling locatee lease land. So this is when First Nations person who had the CP owned the land and then basically built like a subdivision kind of thing, and they were selling each unit. So they're like, help us. And so Vancity's like, oh, okay, yeah, that is an approved development, so we can mortgage on that. And that's great. What I was seeing, and like obviously other people were seeing, was that, okay, so why are we just quickly able to provide a mortgage to a non-Indigenous person on technically Indigenous land, but when an Indigenous person wants to get a mortgage, it's all like, okay, how do we do this? This is confusing, and there's barriers and barriers and barriers, right? And I mean, there was the desire to do it, but there was just barriers, and we couldn't figure out why there were barriers. Like, this is basically the same land, and if you break it down, it's basically you're lending to someone who's not Indigenous, or you're lending to someone who is Indigenous, and that obviously looks like a glaring, like, that's an issue. So what they found was that it's about seizing assets, potentially like recourse, about mitigating risk. And so this is why we actually sat down. We went to Sts'ailes. They have like a lands title office. A couple other financial institutions were there. And it was just like a good, again, like collaborative approach to like the problem solving. And I felt like I got to be in the middle of it because I know some of the pain points as like an Indigenous person when they're like they want to immediately be like, oh, well, we can't seize assets. Okay, like that's the first thing you're thinking about when you look at me when I come into the bank is, oh, we can't like there's PPSA, personal property security agreement, and that's like what something you would put on, a lender would put on a vehicle, for instance, like a piece of property, kind of like a mortgage, but for a vehicle. And in the Indian Act, which again a lot of First Nations people would rather not be part of, it would say like you can't go and seize that asset on reserve lands. So then as a financial institution, we're like, well, that's risky then because we have no recourse. And it's nothing personal. They're just like, that's kind of your job, is mitigating risk, making sure the deal makes sense.
You're giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars. You want to make sure that you have a strong agreement.
So I mean, I can see the standpoint, but then there's a way to communicate that without being offensive, right? And being like, this is what we're thinking about. Then there was just the legality of it, of like, of like, well, it's not in our typical conventional lands title office in Victoria or whatever, right? It's held by a small lands department from the band, basically, or in the community. And so we're kind of wrapping their head around that, and that this is still legitimate. Just because it's a little bit different doesn't mean it's less real. And then I think the biggest one was the valuation of the land. As soon as they were like, well, no, you can't sell it. So say it was you, Aaron, you had the CP and you wanted to build a house. And like to do that, but like say you want to sell it afterwards, like, well, you can't just sell it to anyone, right? And like just not knowing what the rules were, again, it's just like, it's not easy. They have to figure out how to navigate that, who would be able to like live in that house afterwards if you would decide to move or wanted to sell. So again, it's like that free market. Like if you were buying a house on Promontory, you can sell that house on the free market and they know that a comparable house down the road sold for X amount, and that's how they value the property. With this, it's a unique property and they weren't sure how to value it. So just to save, to like kind of like pad it to make sure that it was less risky, as per, like they would say, they would just make it lower value, right? Like it's like if you're budgeting for yourself, you want to overestimate your expenses and underestimate your income, so that if like, because if you're, then you're happy, there's a happy accident at the end, right? So kind of that same, but there's a point. So I'm like, I can see how they're trying to mitigate risk and how they're trying to offset some of like their not knowing. But I also, on the other hand, see how that is not equal, not fair, and borderline offensive. So it was kind of navigating that. The other benefit, not just because it's the right thing to do and it makes sense, is that a lot of the capital that is being used to like fix up these homes or to build them are coming from the band, and that money could be used for like other like programs, infrastructure, like all this other stuff. So that's why I was pretty passionate about helping them make that more accessible, right? So that they can use those funds for other things, right? And giving people that power of like ownership, right, and control of their own property, and also it meant that people were able to move back to their communities. So very often, so what it was basically, we called it like an A-to-A lease, or they called it a self-lease. So basically, you own the CP, like the certificate of possession, and then you're leasing the land to yourself. That's basically as simple as it was. And so all we have to do is approve the head lease, and then we would approve the mortgage like we would anyone else, just with income verification, credits, all still applicable. And for the most part, it was progressive mortgages, like building mortgages. So people would get the land, and maybe the land was gifted, so that's already like awesome. They might have a grant to help offset some of the costs. And then from there, like, it's still not everyone can afford to do build a home. Like, it's quite expensive. So often the people who were applying for this maybe lived off reserve and owned their own home elsewhere. So they were pulling out equity already there. But again, there's opportunity there for people who already are in a house, so they don't have to build, but they want to access that equity to fix it up, maybe build an addition, go on vacation, like whatever. Like it's theirs to use how they want, kind of thing.
I think that that's so important, because through my role as a court worker, I got to see one of the, like, there's there's this complexity of the word systemic racism, because people try and point to, I think the Indian Act is a really good example of systemic racism because it does judge a whole group of people based on their ethnicity and not on anything else. But another way to look at it within the court system, because when that article came out about me, there were a few people I saw in different threads being like, they're treated just the same as everybody else. And I think that it's like, I can offer tangible examples of how it's not. And one of them is that if you're a Caucasian person and your parents own their home, they use part of the ownership of their home as a surety to say, we're so confident that we're going to make sure that Timmy attends his treatment, goes to therapy, gets his counseling done, that we are willing to put up part of our home as a surety to say, we are going to make sure that he does that and we're going to take that responsibility. The difference for Indigenous people is, for the longest time, they don't own their property and they don't have assets that they can say, I'm a surety. And tied in with that is maybe their parents have court issues, maybe their grandparents have court issues, so there's not that supportive person to take on that responsibility, which is kind of how the Native court worker role came about, because it was recognizing that there's this huge difference in how Caucasian people get treated because of ownership of property in comparison to Indigenous people who don't own their property. And so making this accessible, you being involved in this, like, to most people listening right now, they might be like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but I don't know much about, like,
boring.
but people get that reaction. But it's important to understand the ramifications long term over the next 25 years of you helping build this relationship with Vancity and leasehold property, because it has far-reaching effects in our courts, in our community, in our ability to develop the community, that go far beyond just, oh, now I own this little bit of property or I have a lease on my property now. It actually has really important implications for our ability to change the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the court system or in the prison system, for addressing poverty, for addressing so many other issues that I don't think get talked about enough in tying in with this, because I'm sure Vancity wasn't thinking about any of these other ramifications that will come from supporting this initiative. They were just viewing a smaller aspect of the issues they see within their organization that they wanted to address. But it has broader, really important implications. And when I saw your involvement with that and talking to Chanel, it was like, that's another thing that, again, role models aren't just what you can see on the surface level. It's this in-depth understanding of, like, the impact of what you did will make on all communities. And if Vancity can apply that across BC, and then if other credit unions across Canada can take that similar lead, it's going to have a huge, hopefully, impact on so many other areas that people don't expect. And so I want to appreciate you for that. And can you tell us about being at Vancity and starting Luna Float, and what that whole process was like to bring that idea about, and what that process was like?
So, and then we talked about this a little bit before, not today, but it kind of goes into a little bit, like, a couple years before I actually left. Oops, sorry, I'm placing my mic. Before I left Vancity, and that was, like, the song. And it'll all make sense, I swear. But having some stress-induced illnesses, like, I like working at Vancity. I currently work there. I left on really good terms. I say that by the end of, like, my account manager, I was what they call a BBAM, a branch business account manager. And so I was working with entrepreneurs and small businesses. I was dating my now husband, who is very entrepreneurial, and it's just so nice to be around these passionate people, and it was inspiring. And I was like, I have this business degree, and I teach business plan writing, and I'm telling people a lot of things, but what do I actually know? Like, maybe I should put my money where my mouth is. And there was that desire for the autonomy, and just to see, like, why the heck not? Like, life is short. Like, let's try it. And I wanted to go out and do something and own my own business and that sort of thing. And so I left Vancity on good terms and did that. What I wanted to backpedal with was, like, I didn't actually know Luna Float. It wasn't, which I wanted to own a business. I wanted to try to create something, but I wasn't sure what. And then a good friend of mine was like, well, what about float therapy? Like, you're very passionate about that. Maybe tie that in. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so smart. Like, that's a great idea. And while I liked Vancity, there was also customer service. Like I was saying, you see people in different parts of their life. And for me, I think maybe I didn't like I was taking a lot of that on, a lot of people's like stress and emotions, and if they were stressed out about money, like I was stressed for them, and I was just, so a little part of that was being taken on. I had stuff going on in my personal life, and that wasn't really good, like that sort of thing. And I didn't really have the tools to process stress. Like you just kind of get over it, you just push through. And I thought stress was just like, oh, you're stressed out because you're studying for a test. Like I didn't understand the biological and psychological elements of that like it increases your cortisol and you know, I'm young, but we still didn't really talk about mental health back in school and you know, in my family really like that. And so I didn't know the signs of burnout and that sort of thing until it manifested physically. So I was playing roller derby. I also started a roller derby league back in the day, and it was awesome. And I've always been pretty athletic. I like playing soccer and different sports. And roller derby, I wasn't good at it first because I didn't really know how to skate, but I learned, and it became, you know, one of my passions. I had to stop just because it was too much involvement. Like it was also a not-for-profit association, and I was on the board of that. And let's face it, it was lots of bumps and bruises. I had some injuries. I was like, okay, I want my body to work still, so I had to say goodbye to that. But that was like kind of a way to de-stress, I thought, right? Like, you know, your adrenaline's pumping, you're kind of like you're in the zone, so you're forgetting everything. But it wasn't, you know, calming. It wasn't resting. It wasn't restorative. I also did kickboxing, so again, you can see the theme here. I was like punching my stress away, and it didn't, like, it helped avoid some of my problems, but it didn't really help me address them. So I'm trying to think of, it does seem so like a distant memory now, which is kind of nice, but I was young, like mid-20s, and I just felt sick and like I didn't know what, and I had been prone to like pneumonia, bronchitis back when I was younger, and I remember coming in and I was having heart like palpitations, and I had those issues as a kid before, but it was never really diagnosed. Like I was on those ECGs, and I knew I was like, I must have pneumonia too. Like I just feel like crap, and I went to my doctor. It's not my doctor anymore, because he always had his hand like over the pad of like prescription paper. And back then he was like, okay, we can talk about either your lungs or your heart, but we can't do both. Like you can't bring two problems at me at the same time, right? And I'm like, I don't know, like maybe they're related. So I was like, okay, let's just deal with my pneumonia. We'll deal with all the other stuff later. So he's like, yeah, here's your prescription for your antibiotics and stuff, which obviously I needed. And I started feeling better. And then I finally had enough energy to go back, and I was like, okay, what about this heart thing? Like I'm a healthy young woman, I'm playing sports, and like I can be playing roller derby, which is quite, you need a lot of energy and like strength. But then all of a sudden I'll just be like gas bringing up the laundry up the stairs and like sweating almost, and just like, and he did some tests, and he basically, my heart was racing too high and pounding out of my chest. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't feel very good and makes me feel like really nervous. And so he's like, well, we'll put you on medication to lower your heart rate. I was like, that seems kind of weird. And I'm like, but also it pauses and then goes low. And he's like, oh, right, we'll put a pacemaker in you. And I was like, really? I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that.
That's a very invasive procedure.
And you need to upgrade that, like, equipment. Like, and I think every 10 years or something.
Things, right?
Yeah,
like
and I was like 24, 25. And I was like, I think I'm going to have to think about that, right? So I actually went to another doctor, and I can't remember what came first, because I ended up having rubella, pneumonia. So rubella is German measles. I had shingles, which like normally is in like older people. And yeah, that actually, the shingles incident, I have to say, like I was at Vancity working, and all of a sudden half of my body started getting numb, and I had like this like itch on my back in between my shoulder blades, and I didn't know what it was. And then all of a sudden, like it's like coming up, and I'm like trying to like finish my work, and like all of a sudden it gets to my face, and I'm like, I think I better go to the emergency. I actually went to my chiropractor, and he's like, I'm not touching you. He's like, I think like you could be having not a stroke, but it was something like serious. So I went to went to emergency, and they hooked me up right away. And of course, they're like, oh, you have an irregular heartbeat. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's allegedly benign, but like, what's wrong? They even really knew. They basically sent me, they said I wasn't having a stroke, which was good. So then I went back to my doctor, and she was amazing. She's like, do you have a rash? I'm like, I don't think so. I'm like, oh, I have like this itch on my back. Sure enough, that was shingles, and shingles affects your nervous system, and that's why like our nerve networks are very like they mirrored image, right? So that's why it was like a perfect line down my body, and it was just affecting the side. So I had shingles. I went on medication for that, but she basically diagnosed me with a general anxiety disorder, peppered in some CPTSD and stuff like that. I had been going through counseling, which I am a huge supporter of. I think people should definitely seek counseling. But finally, it was just like, it just manifested physically. Like my brain had been telling me to slow down and that I needed to do these things, but I didn't stop and listen until it physically was tangible. Like I could show someone, oh, see, this is like how I have been feeling inside, like mentally, but like it took for it to like manifest into physical symptoms that I could almost like prove to people.
What was that like? Because Rebecca had basically the same thing with her stomach problems and her back problems, was trying to cope, and people kind of just expect you to turn that off at a certain point in time. Like you're having dinner and nobody wants to be hearing about your health problems when you're in the middle of dinner, and yet you're in agonizing discomfort or feeling something. And it seems like we as a society seem to struggle with giving that space to people to be like, hey, it's just dinner. Let's have what's going on. Let's hear what's going on. Like that's way more important than talking about what my week was last week. So what was that like to have this constant feeling of not being comfortable in your body and feeling like your body and you were not on the same page and not being able to share that with people in an easy way?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it was more like getting poked and prodded with like all of these different tests. And yeah, people just kind of looking at you like, well, you're young, like it's probably not that bad. And like really, the term gaslight gets thrown around a lot, but it was definitely like something that kind of happened. But I feel like more myself, like I'm like, I gaslit myself, because you just question yourself, like, is it really as bad as I think it is? Like, because you kind of like see how other people react to it, and you're like, well, they don't seem like it's a big deal, so maybe I'm overreacting. And yeah, and I mean, still, like, once it was physical, it wasn't a huge wake-up call, because then it was like, okay, well, now we'll just fix the physical. So now that it's manifested physically, we fix the physical, and then I'll be fixed, right? But yeah, and so I actually ended up taking about, I think a month, maybe not even a month off of work, first like stress-related. And that was like, you know, you hear people who are like, oh, don't let them put you on that medication because that's gonna fix you. Like, I don't know, like that's gonna throw you off, or like don't let them medicate you. Like that was actually some advice people gave me. So it was kind of bizarre. Or yeah, just people thinking like you just needed a break. Like, yeah, well, what's wrong with needing a break too, right? But yeah, I realized that even in this day and age, it was still a taboo conversation. Like, what is mental health? What is stress, anxiety, depression? Like, what is that actually? Oh, you just feel depressed, or you just
go for a walk.
Yeah, so I actually said that, like, that when I took time off, it still was after my health. I pushed through, and then finally I say my brain broke, because and that's when like the more of the depression and stuff set in. I feel like there's a lot of things at play. I feel like I got to a place where I was safe and to break down in a way, right? And so I had like fought, and then it was safe to break down. It wasn't pleasant, wasn't pretty. But then you rebuild, right? So then I found floating. So I was like, hey, maybe I should not be doing roller derby and kickboxing. Like, maybe I should try this like meditation yoga thing out, or I don't know, like anything. Just try something different, because like Western medicines work, and I believe like if you need to be on medication, like you definitely should. And I was medicated for a long time, and I found something that fit for me. I've since been off of it, but it's something that I'm, you know, even just being a new mom, like being aware that it might be something that I need to, it's a resource I can use if I need to, right?
A tool.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just like so much easier. And like they're like, because yeah, your highs are high, your lows are lows. Some people are like, oh, it'll make you a zombie. And it's like, okay, maybe I need to be a zombie for a little bit, but it didn't. It actually just evened me out and made things a little bit easier to get through. But anyway, so I went, my first float was in Gastown in Vancouver. And I was your kind of typical person, I guess, where I was like, I don't know if I can just sit there. I had some demons. I had some stuff that I had kind of avoided. And I was like, I don't want to be thinking about stuff in there. Like, my brain's going to be too busy. I had a lot of reservations about going in at first, but I was also excited and wanted to try something new. And I went with one of my good friends. And sure enough, as soon as I went in, my brain was just like going like just about nothing, just monkey brain, right? You're just like thoughts, and you just like focus on certain things. And I couldn't really relax. Then you kind of think about the environment. Oh, this is unique. Oh, I'm like in this dark space, and like, where's the door again? And you're just thinking about everything, and you're avoiding stuff. I felt like my brain was a messy file folder, and like these files were getting pulled, and it was like, hey, here's a song, here's a memory, and it wasn't relaxing at first. It was kind of like exhausting. But then there was a point in time where it just slowed down, then stopped. And I guess this is like kind of flow state or meditation, where you're not fully asleep, but you're not fully awake, and all of a sudden time just goes so fast. And I was like, it was just the first time I really felt that calm and like shut off, took a break, like whatever you want to call it. And so when I got out, I was in the shower, and I just was like, oh, this is like, I need this again. And I couldn't really explain what it was, but I felt lighter, and I felt like work had been done. And then I started thinking, like, reading up more about it, and it can lower your cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and like just how stress manifests in the body.
Magnesium.
Yeah, magnesium, exactly. Yeah, it's Epsom salt, like 1,100 pounds of Epsom salt. And yeah, magnesium can affect your heart rate. You sleep. So that means it's a vicious cycle. When you're stressed, then you're not sleeping good, and you need sleep to obviously reset. And that's what it feels like, a reset. Like, they also call it like womb inception. Like, it's very, like, you feel like you're being comforted. You're just very safe in there. So I slept amazing that night. And then there's this positive, like, where you want to keep on moving in this positive healing direction, right? So yeah, I just explored more. I found out there was a lot of studies with it, and the effects of PTSD and anxiety. So a lot of people who have PTSD are put on like Ativan or lorazepam, and it affects your like the fight or flight response in your brain, which is constantly heightened. And so again, like, if you need to be on medication, that's great, but sometimes it's expensive, sometimes it's not attainable, and people self-medicate. And so I found floating as like an alternative, or even just like to help subsidize it in a way. So yeah, it was just like that pause when the world feels like it's spinning too fast and you want off. Just pause, hit the pause button, and you kind of peace out for a bit. So I really, really liked it, but then it's kind of a buzzkill after you have to drive all the way back from Vancouver to Chilliwack. It kind of undoes some of the work there. But it definitely was the beginning of me kind of exploring alternative like ways to manage stress and anxiety. And so yeah, fast forward again back to like when I wanted to start my own business, my friend's like, what about float therapy? And I was like, wow, like, this is an opportunity. Selfish, I could bring floating right into my backyard. But also it's something I want to share because I believe in it, and I feel like it could help a lot of people. And the more, like, there was a lot of work I did through counseling, where I used to have a lot of barriers up, and you're hardened. And I feel like we've touched on that as a good theme to kind of like reoccurs, like when we're talking about entrepreneurs kind of being hardened, you're offering them a service, and they're kind of like, yeah, sure, if you want to. Because I'm now a softer person. I'm very proud of that. I've it takes more courage to be soft, and sometimes that leads to being gullible. And yeah, sometimes I get into these things where I'm like, oh, they want to help me, and then it's like, oh, there it is at the end. It's the pitch, or the catch, if you will. But I'd rather just be me and be optimistic and open-minded, and if there's a catch, then it's not a waste of time versus going back and just being hardened, because then you miss opportunities of collaboration, right? So and so basically I don't even know where I was going with that, but I guess
what was this starting the business process like for you? Because you understand the process of starting a business. You've seen businesses come through Vancity time and time again,
yes.
what they require, what information they need to provide to you to get the loan for it. What was that process like?
So that's definitely like, again, like, why do we like go and do these things, and how do they affect our path? Like, it, in a way, it all did kind of lead to this. Like, all of my background and experiences, good and bad, schooling, work, life, all kind of came to this realization. So it started out more as a passion, whereas like immediately it was like from brain, oh, I want to start a business, into heart, oh, this is a business I want to start, and I want to spread the floating to the world, and it just immediately went to heart. But went back to brain, and I was like, okay, what do? We do the business plan. So I started writing up the business plan, and we talked about like I couldn't really plan for viability, right? So to test viability, you start a business plan, and I think the business plan can be a dynamic document that helps you throughout your journey. But it's also, I realized, do as I say, not as I do. Because I started writing the business plan, and it was hard to find information because we would be the first and only float center in Chilliwack. And the closest one at the time was in Langley. There's not a lot. Like, there's just not a lot of resources. Although the resources that we had were pretty cool because they were very collaborative. They just want more people floating too. So I found out a lot of people who open float centers are more probably heart-driven than financially motivated per se. But I did it. So I started the business plan, and I started looking for space. I need to find numbers. How much is build-out going to cost? How much is it going to cost to lease a space? I need tangible numbers. And Chilliwack's a small town, and the more I talked about it, the more, I guess, word kind of spread. And to the point where people were like, oh, I heard there's a float center opening. And I was like, what? But then I found out that it was me. And I was like, oh, okay. And it sounds kind of corny, but I always say that, like, Luna Float, like, I think sometimes ideas already exist, like the potential of them already exists, and they're kind of like floating around in the air. And this one like floated down, and I just simply got to facilitate the process. So
that's beautiful.
Thank you. So I live in Garrison, and I was walking my dog with my partner. And again, this was as much as a business as it was more of like a rebirth, different kind of like thing for me, right? So I wanted to integrate work-life balance. This was like an opportunity to kind of create something for myself too. So I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if I could walk to work, right? And lo and behold, all of a sudden these buildings are coming up, like right down on Tama Highway, and coming soon. And then the second development was like, okay, maybe that one, like this one's too soon, but I think this would fit in our timeline potentially. And that was pretty much, yeah. As far as like the business side of things go, we needed financing. So, back to the apartment that I had for 10 years that like was potentially a crap investment if you look at like a short span, but I held on, and I long term, and then, you know, it was not a success story in terms of, I made so much money. You know, I barely got back what I put into it 10 years ago. Not a great investment, but I learned so much, and it built confidence, and it educated me. And then when the time came, I was able to utilize that money. So it's kind of like I stashed it away somewhere. And so I used a little bit of that. But yeah, basically the business plan, there's different reasons why you'd write a business plan. In this case, we needed financing. So I was writing it to the audience of lenders, which obviously I know how to speak to lenders because I am one. So I feel like that was a huge asset for me.
How long is a business plan? How many pages?
It depends. I mean, it could be 20 pages. It can be pretty short. It depends on who your audience is. If you're going for lending, sometimes they have templates, so it's always good to have that. Investors, but you can even have like a working document for yourself and go back and look at it. But this is where I have to say, like, I'd love to say that I wrote this amazing business plan and I loved it and I was 100% happy with it, and that's why we are where we are today. But I mean, I really was just got to the point where heart beat brain, and I was like, I don't care what the numbers say, this is happening. Right? So because it was frustrating too, finding the numbers, not knowing, but just, and I'm not recommending this by any means, but yeah, the numbers became so not part of it anymore. It was more of providing the service to the community was the purpose, and just believing and trusting that this made sense, and that because it was going to be good for the community, that it would work out. Yeah. So I mean, sometimes I think, that's the beauty about entrepreneurs, right? Sometimes it's just passion, and, you know, you have to like rein them in a bit.
That's why I think they are role models, is because for the most part, it is this, I see a need.
Mm-hmm.
The banks might not see a need. The
Yeah.
financial institutions, it might not make logical sense. I see the need.
Yeah.
I see the benefit, and I'm going to go with that, because
Yeah.
that your story reminds me of Bill's, in that he was like trying to get a loan, trying to get support, trying to get
Mhm.
understanding, and he saw this, nobody's doing local meat. Well, 15 years later, now it's everybody wants local meat, and that's the most
Yeah.
reasonable, logical thing to want, and everybody's on that fad. But
Mhm.
15 years ago, he was fighting an uphill battle trying to
Yeah.
raise awareness of the benefits that this could bring.
And I mean, financial hat on, yes, obviously, like it's good to have numbers and be able to be confident and present these things. But numbers aren't going to help you sleep at night. Well, I mean, they might, but they're not going to keep you going. Like that's not going to be your why sustainably.
Yeah.
Your why has to be more of that purpose piece. So I think it's balance ultimately. And I mean, there's things I would have done differently, but yeah, like we're learning and we've added services since then. And we're only, this October is going to be 4 years. So we're still a very new business. We're still growing. We're still learning. Yeah.
Can you tell us about how you got some of the equipment? Because I think that also shows how you
Mhm.
set yourself apart, how you were looking for the best, most
Mhm.
cost effective, but also the most local ways to go about doing things.
We were, again, timing was, oh, dragonfly. Timing was amazing. Vancity is all about supporting local. Making like local makes sense just for like carbon footprint wise, like when you're shipping stuff. And I also have like a financial background, not necessarily a plumbing and electrical background. And I knew that being a float center owner would pull out a lot of different skills that I would need to learn, or I always would say, like, if you're not good at it, if you don't like it, pay someone or bring those people on as team members. You can't do everything or else you're going to burn out, right? So I'm definitely a big advocate of trying to prevent burnout for entrepreneurs as well, because you do try to just take it on and do everything. So I was like, it'd be nice to have someone on the team who is local, who could help, us a little bit more. It was easy. I found ProFloat. They were living in Agassiz and they were manufacturing float cabins in Chilliwack. Like,
what are the odds?
Right?
Yeah.
And so they actually aren't in business anymore. They're beautiful, passionate people. And again, it's that balance of passion, but also having that financial side of things too, right? And I feel like it's a balance. And if you go too far on one end, then sometimes it's not sustainable, right? You burn out or money runs out or whatever it might be, right? So it's navigating that balance. And I'm more saying that out loud to remind myself. But yeah, they chose to close their business after, I think, about 5 or 6 years. So we, again, just lucked out getting in that window. We got 4 of their float tanks. They came and installed it. And we went with them because they're the only Canadian float tank manufacturers.
Wow.
And they were the only ones. I don't think anyone's making them in Canada right now. So opportunity for someone. And I liked the style of them. So float tanks, like we use the term float tanks or float pods or float pools or float cabins. And some are open. I've actually just recently seen someone who converted their pro float cabins into like an open concept, basically just taking the roof off and you're just like floating in a room, like a pool in a room, which is really cool. Something I might look into. Then there's pods that kind of look like clamshells. I was in a tank, which they're very like old, like they're like the original. Like floating is actually back from like 1950s. A neuroscientist invented them, and yeah, it was very like old sci-fi kind of looking thing. And you open a hatch and can't go in. I loved it. I mean, it was great, but there are people who float for so many different reasons, and I felt like I wanted to I wanted to make it as accessible for the majority of people, right? So I felt like some of the feedback I had heard was mobility, right? People are coming in for aches, pains, chronic pain, arthritis, fibromyalgia, all sorts of things, and like we want them to be able to get in and out of the tank easily and safely. The other is, people having PTSD or even just being claustrophobic or anxious. A bigger, more spacious tank is going to be more inviting. So check those boxes as well. Yeah.
That's amazing. And what has some of the response been? Before we get to the responses, what did you try and make the environment? Because I've been there, and I think that the environment is so important because it's this whole other vibe that you're not in. It doesn't feel like a business. It doesn't feel like you're trying to sell something. Like there's not a big sign that says all of your pricing on it. It's not stressing that aspect of it. It seems like that part is very laid back, and then the environment you've created, I think, goes hand in hand with the float tanks.
Yeah, thank you. And that was intentional. And then it's an environment. It doesn't feel like a business. So part of research and development was I got to float a lot of different places, and actually our contractor had already floated before too, and so it was really nice to be partnered with them. Again, he has this vested interest because he's getting a float center built and he's getting to build it, and so we're seeing what we like and what we don't like at other centers, and taking what we do and omitting what we don't. It's awesome because floating was getting more popular. This is a beautiful dragonfly. I'm just amazed. They're getting more popular, which is great. So with that is the owner's kind of personality comes through. And so almost like I use the tattoo shops as an example. Maybe back in the day, I say, they were a little more rough around the edges where, you're thinking like, I wouldn't take my grandma to this tattoo shop. I don't know, right? It's just like, rough around the edges. Whereas now you can go to a tattoo shop that, like, all different kinds. Like, there's just different energies and vibes, and you can pick which one is best for you, kind of thing, right? So how that relates to floating, I guess, is there's some where it's a very, like, their background is in energy work, spiritual, metaphysical even kind of thing, and you go in and it smells like patchouli, and and that's like totally fine, and that floating for them is like the deep dive into meditation and that sort of thing. And you just definitely get that hippie vibe. And some people who don't identify with that are just going to be like, oh, this isn't for me, and I wouldn't want that. And like, not saying that the other centers like should only do what I do. Like, I think like it's because so many center owners, this is an extension of them, that it makes sense. And they're that's who they're attracting, and that's fine. Or maybe I'm completely wrong. Who knows? And then there were ones that were like kind of clinical. Like I floated in one that felt like I was like Steve Jobs like created this. It was like an Apple product. It was just like white, and it was and it was fine. It was just kind of sterile, and it's not that it was bad. Floated a lot of float houses. What I liked about theirs that we kind of adopted was just the simple polished concrete floor. Just simple was more the best kind of thing. Growing up in Chilliwack, I also feel like there was this feeling that like, oh, it's a spa, it's a health spa, and like, sure, it's a place that you can rest, treat yourself, self-care, #self-care, whatever. But I also saw it as like the clinical side of things, the therapeutic side of things, but not making it feel therapeutic and clinical. So I knew that there was, again, goes back to the business plan. If you're trying to figure your demographic, and as a lender, you don't want someone to say, everyone's my demographic. You want to try to really pinpoint that. But at the same time, my heart's like, I don't want to turn anyone away. Like, this can be for anyone. We've had as young as like 6 years old, and we've had as old as, I think I had someone who was like 90 some odd float. Like, age isn't really getting in the way. People float for so many different reasons. So it's like, I usually try to think of it more as that. And even that's hard because I float for many different reasons. Like, and each float's different for me. It might be more of a physical float, or I just fall asleep and I needed to. You get the float you need, not the float you want all the time. Whereas other times it's more of like a spiritual feeling, meditative, helps me sleep. I know I need to float when I'm starting to get cranky, snarky, that sort of thing. So it helps me with my stress and anxiety, but it also like has physical benefits too, right? So, but that being said, people might be attracted and come to us for a specific reason and then find out on their own that it helps them with other things. So they might come because they've been in a motor vehicle accident. They heard it was good for their back and neck pain, or maybe the trauma associated with that accident. People who come in who have, like I said, chronic pain, or they're doing it for meditation. They're doing it for athletic recovery. A lot of athletes actually have them, which has been kind of cool. A lot of like, again, twofold, helps them, their mental gym, like helps their mental game. Steph Curry, basketball, he did a commercial with a float tank, which was super cool. And it was about how he uses it to get his mind in the game and also to decompress after a game. You know, when he feels like maybe he missed that basket, and now he has that weight on him. But it also is good for the athletic piece, like the muscle recovery. So anyways, I mean, there's lots of different benefits, and I just wanted to make sure everyone felt like it could be, that this could be for them. And we had typically like older men come in and they're like, is this a spa I send my old lady to? Which, who uses that term? But yeah, so this is what they were saying. And it was like, I want them to feel like it's for them too. Like, why wouldn't it be? So I didn't want it to feel overtly spa-ish, overtly feminine, just neutral, and kind of like anyone could feel that they belong there. Yeah. So I'm glad I achieved that, hopefully. And I mean, actually, our membership and our clients, I mean, indicate that we do. Like, every day is different. Some days we have all morning, it's like, oh, just all men, or, you know, and or we'll have someone floating who's, like a young, like 20-year-old man. Then we have like a 70-year-old woman floating across the hall. Yeah. And that's awesome. I love that. And then they can connect even too, that, oh, like, hey, you float. Like, you just kind of like, if someone else floats, you're like, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
That's awesome. What has some of the feedback been from some of the people who are regular users? What has their response been?
It was funny. We actually just celebrated someone's 100th float.
Wow.
She's a nurse. And I see a lot of people, like first responders, nurses, paramedics, firefighters, like RCMP, like people coming in to decompress, like people, caregivers, people who they give so much of themselves to their work, moms, right? And they're replenishing themselves, or filling their cup kind of thing, right? And it was funny because I got to know her when I was working there more, and sometimes floats are more like introspective, where you're like, you want to like keep that quiet, and so you're just kind of like nod, they like leave, they float away. Where other times people like want to talk, they're just like, whoa, I just had this thing and I want to share it, and you're like, I'm here for it, tell me everything. And so again, you really connect with these people. And so I wanted to be there. Actually, I had to bring my baby, so I was like, I just want to like congratulate her and thank her. Like, I am so grateful. Like, you have spent 100 times 90, like 900 minutes. Yeah, is that right? Math? 9,000, I don't know. Anyways, the float's 90 minutes, and she did that 100 times at our space. And she laughed. She's like, oh, what are you doing here? Oh, your baby's so cute. And I was like, I'm here because like, and I gave her a little like gift or whatever. But I wanted that personal touch because I was just like, thank you. Like, you know, she's like, why are you thanking me? Like, I get the benefit out of floating. Like, I'm not doing you a favor. And I was like, I had to laugh. I was like, I guess, but you know.
That's the collaboration.
Yeah.
Like, neither of you are looking selfishly at it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just taking the time. And I feel like there's so many reasons to not make the time. And I get into this pitfalls myself. Like, I own the business. I live 7 minutes away, and there's still times when I get in my own way of like not making the appointment. So even just making the appointment, setting time aside to do something that you know is restorative, that's going to help you long term, is like, that's the first step, right? So yeah, I mean, one of my favorite stories was a member who, I say member because like they're like, we have monthly memberships, and then people who just come in and buy packages, and that's fine too, whatever works for people. But he actually won a 3-pack, and he was ex-RCMP, and he was kind of one of those guys who was like, what is this? What? Like, no, like, is this a spa? I don't go to spas. Like, I'm a tough man. And I was like, okay, well, it's not, it's this. And like, again, I'm not knowing anything on his background. Like, these are like all of the like laundry list of why someone might float, right? And I always usually use my own example. And he's like, I guess I'll try it. But he was like, as much as I might make him seem kind of rude, he wasn't. He just like this like kind of grizzly bear guy. And so he came in for his first float, and he hated it. He got out early, and he was like, that was stupid. Like, you're just sitting there doing nothing. And like, and you could tell he was like kind of like wound up, right? And I was like, well, you know, like, often people are very busy, and like just taking that time to pause is usually much appreciated. But it's also a practice. Like, you don't just get it. Like, I shared my experience. Yeah, my first time wasn't like, I didn't love it the first 30 minutes. It was work that had to be done. So it's kind of hard where it's like, yeah, the customer isn't always right. Like, you're educating them, you're listening, you're sharing, like holding space with them. and not imposing, but you're just kind of like giving them general guidelines that, hey, that's normal to feel that way. But also, what if you tried to stay in a little bit longer? What would that look like if you did this, like push through that? But yeah, he's like, I wish there was a clock in there, knowing which time, like what time it was. I'm like, maybe it's, you know, the illusion of control, and maybe the lesson is that you need to learn to not, you know, feel like you have to have that control. And he's like, okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow, whatever, right? And so he books another appointment because he has 3. So I have to, give him accolades for doing that. So he came for a second time. He stayed in like double the time, but not the full time. And he came out and he was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't get it. Like, he's like, he's like, it's just boring. Like, people pay you to do this. Like, he was kind of like, but he was more like just jabs. Like, he's kind of joking, right? But now he's opening up and he's like, well, you know, he's like, I think I might have fallen asleep for a bit. And he's like, and I woke up in the dark and I didn't actually feel. Like, he's like, normally that's a trigger for me. And I was like, oh, okay. So then he starts, like, his walls are starting to come down. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I only sleep like 3 hours a night, maybe max. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, that's not great. I'm like, come here just to sleep. Like, it's safe to fall asleep. You're not going to sink. You're not going to roll over. And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, I have one more. I guess I'll give it another chance or whatever. And then his wife used to pick him up. So I happened to be there when he came in for his 3rd float. And I think he stayed the whole time, or he got out a little bit early, but he came out and he just was like, yeah, like, I get it. And he's like, it was hard. And he's like, I still like struggle. He's like, but I feel safe there. And I feel like, yeah, like safe. And then he just starts sharing a lot of stuff. And then he actually realized, like, the light bulb went on that part of this group that he belongs to, that were helping men with PTSD, had mentioned floating. And he just didn't make the association that this is what they were talking about. And so he's like, yeah. So he felt kind of proud. He's like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. And so he ended up signing up for a membership, and he floated with us twice a month, like on the same night, every, because he needed that kind of consistency. But I just love that, because it's not about like forcing someone into like seeing it our way and like everyone has to love floating. Like, that's definitely not it. Maybe it's not for everyone. I think it could be for anyone. But the not giving up, the being a little bit brave to just kind of face this guy and be like, kind of laugh with him about his little remarks, but helping him explore that. And so it's nice to have that opportunity to talk. We don't always get to, and we're not counselors, we're not therapists, like, we definitely don't do that, but it's a self-guided kind of experience, right?
Yeah, just to that counseling point, I think that we wouldn't need so much counseling if we had stronger connections and if we were able to be more real with our friends and family in so many ways. I've just watched peers of mine not feel like, I know they're not opening up to anyone ever. And so, yeah, you need counseling because you're not talking about all of the things you're going through, and I know you're going through plenty. And so I just feel like I even think, obviously, with people who do have strong family supports, they may need counseling. But I think that the reason so many more people need it right now is because all of our interactions feel so staged that, like, I go into the subway, save on whatever the store is, they say, hey, how are you? I say, good, fine. They say, how's your day going? I say, good. They say, good. Like, we leave.
It's robotic.
That becomes so much of our life that I think that we see that a lot.
And for me, I used to get stuck in my head, and I say, like, gaslit myself, where I'd be like, is that what I think? Well, and then I would rationalize it, or I would talk down to it, like, oh no, or this is the excuse, or this is probably why. And so it would just stay up there. And like, that's, I think, the biggest thing for me that counseling did was, like, she would ask all these thoughtful questions, which I think you're amazing at, really pulling out those thoughtful questions and getting a good response. So she'd ask a question, and I'd just be like, in my head, I'd have an answer, but then I'd analyze the answer before I say it. And just that it's a safe place. And like, if you say something, like, we can then explore it. It doesn't just, like, you don't say something and now it's this like static, that is you.
Who you
You're
are.
Right, exactly. And so just that permission, that freedom to speak freely, to think freely, and like let it out, it was invaluable. And then floating, I think, is like, yeah, you're not really speaking out loud, but you can process things, and it gives you time, like, to pause, because we're so inundated with like stuff, and then you avoid things by scrolling Facebook, and while you're not watching a show on TV, and you go to bed, and you don't sleep good because your brain's still probably trying to process things that you've been avoiding. And you wake up, and then you just like plug back into everything. And yeah, so floating for me is just that time to pause and then see if there's anything that needs to be addressed, right?
That was definitely my experience, because I'm a person, when I first went floating, I was doing law school, 2.5 hours into UBC, 2.5 hours back every day, 5 days a week. Just exhausted by the end of the day, frustrated by having to wait there for so much time, and being able to understand and learn about it first, I think did me a huge benefit, because I would have been like that guy who I'm very much dismissive before and then I learn about it afterwards. And for that experience, I was like, you know what, I'm going to learn about it first. Rebecca was a little bit hesitant. She's like, I don't want to be locked in a box. You want to lock me in a box? And I was like, I don't want to lock you in a box. I want you to have something that helps you relax. And so we did the research. We looked at your website. We watched the videos. We learned about it first. And they were like, don't judge it until you've done 3 times. And I was like, okay, I'm going to lock that into my head, because my first time is my first time. And so it's likely that I'm going to want to get out soon. It's likely that I'm going to have all these thoughts. There's a great Headspace Netflix show that talks about meditation. And so we were watching that, and watching that was kind of like, oh, this is tough, like just with my own thoughts. And so going into it, knowing that first and feeling like this isn't going to be the time. This isn't going to be, this first time isn't going to work for me. Like I know myself, it's not going to work. It worked. Because I had already owned that I'm gonna, oh, there's a thought, oh, there's another thought, oh, there's another thought, okay, how many more? And I forget it might have been the Headspace Netflix documentary that was like, just instead of getting frustrated with new thoughts coming in, just ask what the next one's gonna be, and eventually you'll run out of them. And so I did that, cool. And then I ended up relaxing, and my first float experience was very positive. But if you go into it thinking, first time's going to be knock it out of the park, and I'm going to be the Zen master, it's like probably go into it with the other mindset. Can you tell us about the other aspects of Luna Float? What are NeuroSpa and the sauna?
Right. So we brought in the NeuroSpa next. I realized, like, while floating is like my passion, there was extra space that we weren't utilizing, and I wanted to bring in more like modalities, more services. And I had tried this NeuroSpa chair in Vancouver at a different float center. I think it's called Pure Rest or Pure Float. And it was cool. It was just, I didn't know much about it, but it was also manufactured, patented and manufactured in Montreal. So it was basically just super relaxing and helped prepare me for a float, but it also can be standalone. So I felt like it complemented our services, because floating, typically 90 minutes, you can get out early if you want, like that between the 1 hour and 1.5 hours. Like, I'd rather people have the time and potentially not need it than we turn the music on and they're like, oh, like that's probably a good business tactic, like leave them wanting more. But like, no, I want them to get the full experience. Go deep and that sort of thing. So 90 minutes can be a barrier for people. So I wanted a service that would be less time, so people could still treat themselves, still get some of that self-care, or it can help extend or prolong their float. So the NeuroSpa uses lights, music, and acoustic vibrations, like in the synergy kind of way. And it's neat because it's like very physical, but also mental and emotional. Like, it kind of touches on everything. So there's different settings that to me seem very similar, but the after effects are just slightly different. One is more relaxing, really good for before a float or before bedtime. The other one's more energizing, great way to start your day, right? You're just like, you feel kind of tingly and like energized, but like not how you would after coffee, like not jittery. Energized, but not jittery. An instant mood booster. Like, I tell people, like, try not to smile in there, because it's just like, you just can't. So you're lying in the zero gravity chair and you put on a headset, and then this like kind of like roof comes over top, and on the roof is a painting. And I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, it's a hand painted scene of like basically like the Aurora Borealis and like mountains. And it's not much to look at. You're just kind of like, okay. But then once you turn it on, so from your lower lumbar, the vibrations start, and it goes through like your body. Like, you eventually start feeling it going through your fingertips and your toes. And I've had people tell me that their sore neck felt better and that they slept better afterwards. But yeah, then there's lights projecting on the screen. So the picture of the painting actually looks like it's kind of moving. So yeah, definitely a strobe effect. You can have your eyes open or closed. I like to compare things to nature, because I feel like there's so many elements in nature that are medicine, obviously. And I mean, this is maybe not necessarily nature, but you're in a car, driving, or you're the passenger, and like the sun's passing through the trees. So I mean, this can also be the sun passing through trees that are swaying and stuff, and you have that. It's almost like hypnotic. Like you're just like your eyes are starting to get heavy, and you're just like that rhythmic kind of feeling, and that's exactly how I feel, right? And it just feels good. So that was something. It's unique. It's something quicker for people. And that's basically that. Like, it's not the same as float therapy, where there's a lot of research being done. It's like a patented technology that combines different things like chromotherapy and vibration, like music therapy and that sort of thing, right? Kind of like, which is not my forte, for example. And then the infrared sauna came at popular demand. People it was listening to the people. They, nowadays, like, people are living in apartments and sometimes, or they just don't have the space, like, or can afford to just have a sauna. So what I liked about the infrared sauna is that, like, if you think about culturally, like, saunas, sweating, like, transcend a lot of different cultures, right? Like, yes, I'm First Nations. I also have, like, I'm part Irish. I have some Scandinavian roots, and like, you think about, like, like the steam rooms and the saunas, or even like Japanese culture. Like, there's so many cultures that this is like part of. Yeah, and sweat lodges, like, obviously, that it was like, okay, not like, it just makes sense that it's like, obviously, when you see that many cultures have like a similar modality, that there's obviously got to be something to it, right? And so I like that. Just for like the cathartic feeling of it, aches and pains. It's, again, 30 minutes, and there's something about sweating that's just releasing, right?
Yeah, because it gets rid of the heavy metals in your body.
Yeah,
there's heat
people
shock
use
proteins.
it for so many different reasons. Yeah, we had somebody who had Lyme disease that was like prescribed, like recommended it. Again, athletes. People with chronic pain. Like, there's different, like, blood pressure issues, and
And how did the name come about, Luna Float? Because it sounds peaceful just to say it.
Oh, yay, I'm glad. So I wanted something, I mean, again, don't know if this is a good business strategy, but I wanted something that made people think, well, what is that? Like, that's curious. Like, I'm curious. Some places are called, like, Serenity Float, and I feel like, well, obviously I want people to feel serene. I don't want to impose too much of, like, a description on my business, because I want it to be open to their own interpretation, right? So Luna Float, to me, just like, obviously float, because that's our main service at the time, the only service we had. I felt like there was a lot of different overlaps. So Luna is Latin for moon. I always liked the moon. I liked nighttime because it's quieter. Typically, it's peaceful. It's just more of a calm. You can, like, just look at the moon and feel kind of calm, I guess. Also, there's the tie-in that, me personally, I was going through different phases, and often that is comparable to the moon's phases, that, like, you're still the moon. Like, the moon's the moon, no matter what phase they're in, and that I'm still me, regardless of what phase I'm currently in. And just embracing that kind of, like, metamorphosis, and that other people, I'm inviting them to do that as well. And then lastly, I'm kind of a nerd, and I just thought, like, the moon affects the tides. We are kind of like that water nature element that, I mean, we call it water, but it's really like 1,100 pounds of Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate, saturates of much more like the Dead Sea, where it's that super mineral rich solution. But it's all water nonetheless, right? So I was like, okay, that's like the tides, and I don't know. It just seemed like it, again, part of like the process. It just clicked, and it just made sense to me.
Well, let's wrap up. You mentioned before the song, and we said we were going to get back to that. So I think you were referring to the song Lucky Me by Big Sean with the magnesium deficiencies. And stuff.
That was just like, well, I kind of touched on that with, do you know the lyrics off the top of your,
Of course.
Okay, well, do you want to tell them the lyrics?
I don't remember that aspect.
Oh, no worries. I think I took a picture of it. I like screenshotted it, or maybe it's in our chat history. But basically, can I look it up on my phone?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I feel like this was a cool, when I met Aaron, how we connected.
Yeah, because Big Sean he was having heart palpitations, and the doctors were saying something similar. They wanted to do surgery on him, and then he was speaking with his mother, who convinced him to try magnesium, because in Western civilization, many of us have magnesium deficiencies.
Okay, so this is a screenshot. I can't even see when you sent it to me, but like last year probably, or no, yeah. So I don't know how the tune goes, but so this was part of like when I was saying that I was sick and that it manifested like physically, even though it was really a lot of stress and anxiety. And again, no doctor wants to actually do the or not, my original doctor didn't want to do the digging.
Yeah.
He just wanted to prescribe me pills and put a pacemaker in me. And he didn't even, like, we didn't even go into like, what was happening in my personal life. Yeah. We didn't talk about that.
Eating.
No, exactly. And and so like my other doctor, like so she found like the mental health piece of it right away. She was like, I can tell like, you are struggling, and like that's okay, like we can fix that. And like it was more of a holistic approach, right? And then so I'll read it out. But it says, man, lucky me, I was diagnosed with a heart disease at 19, could barely stand on my feet. Doctor said they had to cut it open, put a pacemaker on it to put it back on beat. So my mama took me to a holistic doctor, and they prescribed me magnesium for 2 weeks. Went back to the regular doctors, and they said, damn, looks like we don't need to proceed.
Yep.
And he sent that to me, and I was like, because I told him my story, and he was like, that's this song. And I'm like, no, I didn't steal it, I swear.
Yeah. No, and
it's my story.
I think that that's an amazing aspect where music meets reality. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I think for a long time, looked at vitamins and supplements with kind of this eye roll, like, oh, you think that you're going to live forever. Yeah. And we really neglected, because I think that that's a part of self-care, just like floating should be, is making sure you have all the supplements you need. I take magnesium every single night because I take way too much caffeine, even though I know it's not good for me. I still am up on coffee, caffeine pills. I still do all of that because I like, if I'm doing an interview, I want to be sharp. I don't want to risk, I didn't get a great sleep. Like, I know I need to be sharp for it. So making sure I have the magnesium at night got rid of my restless leg syndrome that I had forever and would drive Rebecca crazy because we'd be watching a movie and my feet would just be moving back and forth on the bed like I'm walking down the road because I couldn't stay still. Wow. And hearing lyrics like that, like on his last album was the Bigger Than Me song, where he talks about being like realizing he made so much money and things are bigger than him. Those are the types of songs I try and show people because I think rap gets a really, really, really bad name from some artists that everybody knows. Yeah. But those types of songs.
Well, I was just like, wow, like that's me. And like, I think that's why stories are so important, because you can see yourself in that and it just makes it better. And I think it's like, you don't want to make assumptions like for me, I found floating really helped me. And my doctor told me I could slowly come off of my antidepressants, and slowly I forgot to refill my prescription, and so I ended up just stopping them cold turkey. And I was like, I'm fine, so it should be okay. It was horrible, and by a few days into it, I was having brain zaps, and it was like just really bad. And I was like, well, maybe I should just go back on them, but I wasn't sure how far I had come, like past it. So I floated, and it was so humbling because I was like, this was my story. I have anxiety, but then being medicated, I actually didn't have a lot of the symptoms, and so I felt better. So then I'm like, well, is floating really doing anything? And then 1-8 was like saved me from like, it was just like a bad place, but I got through it and I didn't have to go back on medication. I always just try to have those open conversations because I'm like, while I'm saying floating can help, I'm not trying to say like, oh, down with pharmaceuticals. Like, I feel like there's a time and a place, and people feel like, again, about my space, my environment being welcoming, is that people make assumptions, and like they might think, oh, this person's going to try to heal me with crystals and essential oils, and it's like, okay, like, hey, we do have essential oils and crystals at LunaFloat, but like some things need medicine. Like we need antibiotics to get rid of infections, and we need other pills that potentially help us. But there's also so much else that we can learn. It's not one or the other. It's like another tool, right? It's having those tools in your toolbox, and collaborative and kind of like combining them, right? So I never want to say, oh, it's going to replace chiropractic because it helps your back. Like, no, it can be both. It's like it works together.
Absolutely. And I think that gives credibility to what you're doing, because I know a lot of people who are like, well, I took this, and if you take it, you're just going to be just like me, and you're going to be cured as well. And then you go, I'm not you though, and you don't know what I eat and you don't know what I do in a
Yeah.
day, and so how can I trust you
Yeah.
when you're already saying things that I'm not 100% confident being able to say? This
Yeah.
is just another tool, because I'm really big into, like, I'm up 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. working on stuff, trying to edit a podcast, work on law stuff, work on NCC ABC stuff, always trying to make the most out of my day, because to me right now, from like 25 to 35 are my grinding years. Like, I need to establish myself, I need to work hard, I need to get all of that organized, but that doesn't need to be independent from the well-being of my body and making sure that my body's up to the task.
Yeah.
And so it's, how can I tie all the other stuff in to make sure that I'm well, making sure I go for runs, go to the gym, make sure that I relax and find ways to decompress, allows me to go back to those things with a clearer mind than I would have. And I think my generation's really into like self-optimization and really trying to make sure that we have all the tools to be successful. And I think that that's likely the best way to go about it, because a lot of people say, like, you're your own doctor. When you go into the doctor, you have to advocate for yourself. And they actually advise that you bring someone with you when you see the doctor, because you're going to downplay the problems. You're going to kind of, oh yeah, my leg kind of hurts sometimes. Well, your partner knows that you're in constant agony all the time. And you're just trying to be polite and not come across as
That was literally
dramatic.
me when I was giving birth to our child. I was having contractions, and I kept on like texting my midwife, like, hey, think it's happening. And she was like, because my texts were so lighthearted, and she was like, probably not. And then he's like, call her. You're like crying. And then like, as soon as it's passed, I was like, oh, it's fine. And I called her, but same thing on the phone, customer service voice. And then, oh, contraction. And anyways, you know, and he's like, no. And so, yeah, it was funny. But you're right. You're 100%
Yeah, because I watched Rebecca struggle with that. We would go into the hospital and she would be like, yeah, like I have some, and it's like, they're not going to take care, they're not going to prioritize you. They're not going to pay attention to you. They're going to put you on the bottom of the priority list if we continue to approach it in this way. And so I was like, just be honest. And then all of a sudden she starts physically showing the pain she's in. And then lo and behold, everyone starts paying attention and going, okay, we need to get you in here. We need to check out what's going on. And it's like, I think that people really, like, we keep being told that we live in a narcissistic society. And I have trouble believing that, because I see people in constant agony. I've seen people in different workplaces who are like, I've always had a bad back. And it's like, well, have you tried to fix it? Like, that's awful. Like, how are you living? And so being able to offer tools like this that are accessible, not intimidating, and just a first experience can open so many doors to people, because I think floating is a way into meditation for people, like a gateway, because it's 90 minutes and you paid for it. And for people, like it or not, people think that things would be better if they're free, but we actually value things less if we give it away for free.
That's a huge lesson for me.
And so I think it's important that people have to pay for it and that they have to commit 90 minutes to it, because then there's less excuses, where if you're just like sitting on the ground, I'm going to meditate now. It's like, oh, I need to just quickly check my bank account. Oh, I just need to quickly clean the room and then I'll meditate. Oh, and then I'll make dinner and then I'll relax. And then it never gets prioritized.
That's it. That's our secret. That is like really, it is like that. Like you set the intention, but then those are the tools in place that keep you accountable, right? And it's funny because like floating can be used as like people call it biohacking, right? And it's still 90 minutes. Like 90 minutes in biohacking terms is still pretty long, but if you think about what that actually means, in that 90 minutes, you're actually like, this isn't like proven, but like people will say anecdotally that it's like, if you fall asleep for 1 hour, it's like 4 hours, just because of that. Like if you're trying to put that much like rest, relaxation, meditation, like it's condensed. And so people don't want to make that time because they don't have the time and they're a busy entrepreneur. It's like, if you make the time, like if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a creative, and just to like not keep on grinding and actually just pausing and taking 90 whole minutes to just sit there and like, you don't even know what, like you can come up with your next greatest idea. You can have a breakthrough. Like you don't know. And, it's such a unique experience, and I encourage people to do it. Like obviously, like you're not locked in a box. Like you can have the door open. It's just such a interesting tool that people have, and yet we're our own worst enemies, right? Like we get in our own way.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us about your family and about what it was like to have a child, what it was like for all of these things to kind of come together around the same time. Luna Float's taking off, like all of these things are going on around you. What was it like to become a mother and to move this next chapter of your life? And can you also tell us how you met your husband and what that was like?
Sure. So I guess it's funny because the Vancity is like obviously, I guess, a pretty big part of my life. I actually met him through Vancity. Yeah. I opened one of his business accounts. Not that I date my clients, but that's technically the first time I met him, which is somewhat significant because Chilliwack, you think you almost know everyone. Like back in my day, there was only 2 high schools, Chilliwack or Sts'ailes. I played sports. My parents grew up here. I kind of knew everyone in my age group. It felt like my friend group went to UFB. So actually, I went to UFB with one of his friends, who was his business partner. And anyways, it was always like connections. We could have met each other 10 times over throughout our childhood, and we never did. So yeah, no, I met him in that instance, which was interesting. But it wasn't until about a year and a half later, we never bumped into each other for like a whole year and a half. And yeah, then we did. We're like, hey, like the stars aligned, I guess, and we were just like we're not dating, we're not doing those things, but let's go for coffee. Let's just like let's chat, whatever. And yeah, our non-date date, and it basically never ended. We wouldn't stop talking. It was just that instant connection with someone. Yeah, it was really cool. So, and that was, yeah, I guess about 6 years ago. I had planned a trip to Europe by myself, and I wanted to see if he wanted to come. Like, I think I did that on my 30th birthday, and then I was going to do it on my 31st. Like, I bought the ticket, and he's like, no, go on your own. I talked to him about, some of my struggles I was having, and, kind of that warning label, like, this is what you're signing up for. And he was very supportive. And when I came back from Europe, it wasn't a super long trip, like 3 weeks or something. We ended up moving in with each other. We actually ended up living, like, I lived in a carriage home in Garrison after I sold my house from downtown Chilliwack. We lived a minute away from each other. Like, it was easier to walk than it was to drive. So that was bizarre. Made for an easy move in. So yeah, I moved in with him. And pretty shortly after, we had incorporated Luna Float. And then we opened Luna Float, October 2017. He proposed to me November 2017, like a month later. It was funny because, like, there's obviously some stresses when you open up a business, right? And this was like my first baby, besides my dog. She was my first baby, I guess. And so I'm like, I just, I stress. I want to make sure it works. Fear of failure, all those emotions, right, are just above the surface, or just below the surface, I guess. And so apparently he had the ring. He wanted to propose. He wanted to maybe do it. But then I was just too, like, on edge. Yeah. And he was like, I'm not too sure. Like, I want her to be in a good mood. Like, I want it to be perfect or whatever. And so yeah, then after the excitement, again, being a very anxious person, like, he knows not to surprise me. One time I had the water running and I didn't hear him come home, and I was brushing my teeth and he scared me. I like threw my toothbrush at him and screamed and was like crying, and he's like, so yeah, he knows not to surprise me. So he was like, I want to surprise her, but I don't want to terrify her. So yeah, I mean, it was nice. He had planned a nice evening in November, like we went out for dinner and stuff like that, and we were like going to stay out in the city. And I didn't really expect anything because I thought it was just like, we're just celebrating our, like, a month that, hey, we opened a business a month ago, like, now we finally kind of, things are settling down. So it was very smart because I didn't suspect it. So yeah, he proposed, and then we got married the following year, September 2018. We went to Vegas right after for like a little quick kind of honeymoon, because still relatively new business. It was hard to be away for very long. Lesson to learn is like delegation on my part. It's hard to delegate, right? And then we actually our big thing, we went on a cruise around Italy. We went to Rome, and then we basically ended up in Venice. And we went to like the Amalfi Coast.
I don't know how people do this, but every time people start telling me about their travels, they like rush through it. Oh, please elaborate a little.
Well, yeah, I mean, we did a cruise. One of my friends had used that cruise line a lot, and so originally I started planning, okay, we're going to travel, and kind of like I had backpacked Europe. I say I backpacked Europe But like, I was 30 years old. I was like, okay, I have enough financial means to like stay in hostels that were nice and like have a private room. So like, and I was only going for a few weeks. It wasn't like I had to have my dollar stretch over a year or something, right? Yeah. So I say I backpacked, but it was pretty nice boutique like hostels I was staying at. And I did Amsterdam and Paris, basically. I was going to go to Germany and I never made it because I just liked where I was. So I was going to kind of apply that same mentality. And I'd change plans on the fly. I booked hotels on the fly. So we were going to kind of do that. And we both were just like, we want to, like, we probably aren't going to have an opportunity to do this for a very long time. So like, we want to make it count. We want to see a bunch of things. We don't want to be overly inundated with plans, figuring out how to get vehicles. And so we're like, a cruise seems like an easy way to see a lot of places, get a little taste of it. And then maybe when we have the time and the means, we can go back to one place that we really like or whatever. That was the mentality. And I loved it. It was so great. It was like cruising so easy. But yeah, so we did Rome, the Amalfi Coast, massive lemons. And I mean, I love food. We love food. Wine. It was really good. We did like lots of different like kind of sightseeing and stuff like that. We went to the Mediterranean, or what was it, Sicily. We got super burnt on the beach. That wasn't fun. We went to Croatia, a port in Croatia, where like the Game of Thrones. He never watched Game of Thrones, my partner.
I haven't seen it either.
Okay, well, you guys are in good company. But there's this place in Game of Thrones that's filmed there, so that was pretty cool. I mean, yeah, it was really nice. He is the type of partner, and this is like one of the things, like, just like you open a business, like all these things that are potentially like stressful things, and to have a partner who like brings that calmness into the chaos. So traveling, like, we never had an issue. Like, there's no arguing. It's just like pretty smooth. Like, everything's an adventure. And at the very end, we had a couple of like mishaps that normally would just like make me stressed out, but because, you know, I had him there, and he was almost the one, like, I took a picture of him because a bus basically in Venice stopped somewhere, like in nowhere, on our way to the airport to get back home eventually. The trip there was amazing, and the trip back, it was like wrought with some frustrating elements. So the bus stopped, we all got out, they're speaking Italian, we were kind of confused, so we all got out. And then a bus pulls up and everyone's getting back in. They left us. The doors just, like, we weren't being assertive enough, and we just, like, the doors closed and they just drove off.
Wow.
And we were the only two left behind, and we're like, what just happened? And I thought it was hilarious. And I took a picture of him because he's like, kind of got this like grump face. And I was like, I've never really seen him ruffled, right? Yeah. And I was just like, this is hilarious. And normally I would be like, oh my gosh, like so stressed out. I was like, this is fun. And it worked out. It all worked out. We still caught our plane on time. Our plane actually had to make an emergency landing in Quebec because we ran out of gas because we were stuck on the tarmac for so long. We ended up having to stay in Toronto overnight.
Oh my God. Because
we missed our connecting flight. But guess what we did? We woke up in the morning. We had 7 hours to kill. We went to a float center. We went floating. We tried their sauna before we had the infrared sauna. So that was another thing that kind of like helped add to like, hey, we should get the sauna.
Wow, that's pretty
cool.
cool.
You always look for the opportunity, and something like it sucked. We missed our dog. We missed our bed, but you make the best out of these situations. And yeah, it was really cool. We would definitely go back. There's so many different things. And I'm glad we did it because, like, then of course, like with COVID and everything.
Yeah.
But that was in the spring, well, I guess of 2019. And then at the end of 2019, I found out I was pregnant. And we, like, planned it. We talked about it. And it happened a lot quicker than... I was like, oh, okay, this is real. And so I was almost 3 months, kind of like the time people start sharing the news. And, it's getting warmer. It's the beginning of March. And my hoodies are just starting to get a little tight. And I was like, okay, let's start telling people, right? Like, you have to tell your family first, or, we wanted to. My sister and her wife already knew. I spilled the beans pretty quickly with them. But then all of a sudden it was like COVID and the pandemic, and I felt like our news, while amazing, it just was kind of smaller all of a sudden, and it just felt like kind of awkward, and then also the stresses of what does this mean for my business, for our child, and like our life, and yeah, it was interesting. And so, yeah, LunaFloat closed like mid-March and we reopened June 1st. So we weren't affected too long. And in those months, I grew a baby, like the majority, right, of that's being done. And so it was kind of funny when we reopened and people were like, whoa, like I know like quarantine people put on some weight, but I was like, no, this is a baby as well. And it was nice. It was nice to have that time. Like it was kind of intimidating because you don't have to just worry about yourself, but you're worrying about your unborn child. And so again, my husband was doing most of the getting groceries and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it was a nice time. Again, like the illusion of control that we have, and just like I was trying to follow what's happening and how can I plan and how can I pivot. Everyone's like pivot, and I get it. But at the same time, what about the pause? Why is it immediately pivot? Like we're going through some unprecedented time and you're immediately expected to just pivot that shit. And it's like, no, like there's times to pause too, right? So I really just soaked that in, did the whole nesting thing, I guess. And it's funny, when I was pregnant, I actually found out when we did like the calculation, or when we first went in, that my due date was on my birthday. And for me, a lot of the times in like significant moments in my life happen on or around my birthday. So as soon as that was the date, I'm like, oh, this is real. I know this is happening. And we ended up having him on the 20th, so 3 days after my birthday.
Wow, that is amazing.
And now we're planning his first birthday.
Yeah.
Which, like, yeah, he's 11 months old, and it's bizarre to even think that it's like, yeah, it's bizarre.
That is wild, because I remember meeting you around the time, I think you were just opening up LunaFloat again, and we were learning about this new space.
Yeah, probably, like, June or July.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it wasn't like we had a lot of extra time on our hands, and we're like, we should have a baby with all this time. Like, we knew it would be challenging, and you never know. You can't even really prepare parents for it, because you'll tell them. It's like telling an entrepreneur that it's really hard work. Like, they don't care. They're going to do it, right? And same thing, sleepless nights, and it's hard, and it's like, yeah, whatever. And maybe even being an entrepreneur might have prepared us a little bit for that, that just giving yourself to something bigger than you or something different, and like, definitely the sleepless nights that entrepreneurship prepared us for. But again, it's like, you'll just figure it out. You'll just learn. You'll just figure it out, right?
Yeah. And
so, yeah, I mean, it was a lesson, again, in letting go. The lesson I need to learn still is delegating more, letting go of perfection, and just showing up, I guess. Yeah. Being kind to yourself. For both of us, like, we were very like, we'll stay up late and we'll be working like in the office. Like, a lot of people are like, you guys are so busy, you're so busy. We have this awesome office where their desks like face each other, and it's just like, we both were like, oh, we haven't gone through like an email, like, would take us 3 days to respond to. And maybe that's like normal for people, but like for us, we're like, oh my gosh, like, we're 3 days behind. But it's not even a question. Like, when you have your baby in front of you, like, what's the priority? Like, you just, and so I feel like Oland, like our child, he has helped me really prioritize, like, not prioritize, but be present. Because I find sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, or even just, I mean, people who multitask, when you're multitasking, sometimes you're not multitasking as good as you really think you are, right? There's something to be said for focusing on one thing and doing it well versus trying to do all of the things. And maybe that's actually not the most efficient. And like, or you're talking to a friend, but you're like, I want to check my phone. And it's in your head and you're not doing it, but you're not fully here either. And usually they can tell. And so the same thing is like, I would be taking care of my baby because he needs me, but my head was like, business. Oh, these are all the other things I'm failing at right now. And that doesn't make me feel very good. And I'm sure like that comes out in a way, right, of frustrations. Like, you're frustrated because you're a baby and I'm frustrated because like I have all these other things. And then just realizing that, okay, like, why are these other things even affecting you? Like, this is what's more important. Those things can wait. And like, just, you're like juggling, but it just helped, I don't know, provide more grace in that transaction or that transition. yeah, so he's really taught me to be present and to, like, I never really realized I could shut those things off. I just always thought they were there, right?
The chatter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and just like that, the tasks are like waiting for me. They're just like, come on, like finish your things because you got us to deal with. And I just thought that that's how like your brain worked and like that's just how it is. But it was affecting me. So I was like, then I don't want to that affect my child. So I learned that you just push it away. And like it's another form of meditation, right? And being in control of your mind. And so it's a huge gift. And yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that mindset because I struggled with the chatter for a long time, and I've gotten better at just saying, okay, like it's in my head, let's write all the things down that I need to do so I don't lose it because I'm bad for, oh, I forgot to do that. And then it's like, well, now I have to do it now or I'll forget to do it later.
Yeah.
And so I write everything down, and then Sundays are like my day where Rebecca and I do nothing. And like, it's a lot of work because I always like to try and accomplish something, and I'm just my personality, but I definitely understand that. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it was like to meet your husband and what things you admire about him and what it's been like to see him become a father?
Sure. I mean, so I think the funniest part or the most interesting part is just that from the outside, we might have seemed like two different people. I mean, we are two different people, but when we were talking, it was just like the overlap and the connections and the finishing each other's sentences and just like the yes, you get it was amazing. And we talked on all of our dates so late into the night, and he had to get up early, and it was just like we would just talk. But from the outside, like he met me at the bank, which I probably looked more like this. But when I wasn't at the bank, I was playing roller derby, which we had like an alter ego that I was Molly Mayhem. My number was 666. I had like blood coming down my face. I liked metal music. I went to metal concerts. And I mean, that's all great on its own, but there was an element too that I was going through a lot of stuff and putting up a lot of like barriers and walls and being hard and like, because I didn't want to be hurt and trying to like control the situation. And so there was a lot of that kind of like, I'm tough and like projection kind of out there that people wanted to believe that, then cool, I was happy with that. And he saw right through it and was just like, this is you, and this is like how we, like some of the values that we share. And yeah, whereas other people were like, oh, he seems like quiet and like reserved and like how do you guys work, right? And it's more like, oh, he works late, he likes going to bed at a reasonable time, whereas I was like avoiding things and like staying up super late and like, yeah, probably doing things I probably shouldn't have been. But yeah, so kind of met at a weird time. From the outside, it kind of might look like that we were opposites, but we had a lot of similarities. A lot of similarities and just different routes in our life. Like I had kind of a typical like upper middle class family. Like I was very fortunate for a lot of things. Like they encouraged me to go to post-secondary. I could live with them until I was like early 20s. They helped me save money that way. Just that support system. And like, yeah, university is not for everyone, but that's the path I chose. He didn't have that choice. He was very smart. He had opportunities to go to these universities. And basically, when he was getting ready to graduate, his dad, who he's living with, was deciding to move. And he was like, you can come with me or not. And he was moving to a very small town, probably something an 18-year-old boy did not want to move out of like the town he's known for like the majority of his life to like some back east like small town. So he chose to stay, and he had to get like multiple jobs and a big instant like adult, right? Yeah. Like what does that mean? We both still feel like we're adults, we have a baby, like that's not real, but yeah. I don't think you ever feel that way. But anyways, he had to mature pretty quickly, and I just respect that. Out of like, you can see that that's, you know, how he kind of grew. So he has a really strong like work ethic, and sometimes I have to, I think, remind him to like he is not boring by any stretch of the imagination, but he will tell me that I'm like, I bring the fun into him, and I help through my own like learnings, like, and to like have fun and to just embrace the like absurdity of life sometimes and like quirks. Like and this is again, like having a child is kind of like, never really thought of wanting to have kids when I was younger. But I appreciated their like curiosity and just their point of view and like, oh, this like little rock looks cool, and like just like why not? Like you're never too old to like appreciate like some cool rock or leaf on the ground. And so I'd point these things out to him, and he liked it, and yeah, it was like kind of a breath of fresh air. It's what he needed when you're hyper focused on something, right? It's like the yin yang. You need the both sides of things, right? So I think we complement each other very well. And I don't know, there's so much insecurity and fear, I think, when you bring a child into this world. Like, how are we going to be? And, you know, yeah. And he again, is like really awesome. It's awesome to see him as a dad. That calmness. I had to have a emergency C-section when I first, so when I was telling you that he was like, you're hiding your pain from her, he like was like, you please come and check her out. So I went into the bathtub and I was like having contractions, and she came and checked, and she's like, oh yeah, no, you need to go to the hospital right now. So they're like, thanks to him. So I went, and as soon as we got there, like I wanted to do the home water birth, and that was kind of taken off the table right away. And then I was okay with having it at the Chilliwack hospital. But I wanted to try to do it like the real way or whatever. I mean, like whatever way it works is the real way. I didn't really want to have a C-section, but that like as soon as I went in there, they were like, he's in distress. Like every time you're having a contraction, as soon as you hear that your baby's not doing a good job, like yeah, you just want to get them out and make sure that like So I like had one tear, and then because he had release and control, and you know there's that plan. And so you just, you adjust. And he's just having him there as like that calming presence. And it was amazing staff. It was a kind of adrenaline rush. Had an amazing midwife, got him latched right away. And then because it was COVID, we weren't allowed like any visitors. And I can't say like that I really minded that. We had our own private room for a couple of days, and amazing supportive nurses. And so just it's awesome to have someone who you just are excited to do life with, right? And like you don't really know what it's going to look like. But yeah, he was very supportive. I mean, having to recover from a C-section, he had to do a lot actually. Like I didn't change a diaper for like I think the first week or two, so he was doing a lot of that. I also maintain he doesn't need as much sleep as I do. He'll agree to that. But yeah, and then I feel like early on, before we had the baby, he was kind of like, he didn't even know, like he wanted to touch my stomach, and it's hard to have that connection because you're not feeling like them from the inside. And he was like, I don't know, like maybe like we'll bond more when he's like a full functioning like human, like an adult. No, he didn't say that, but like more of like when they're like 5 or 6, and I'm like, okay, so what about until then, right? But like in his brain, he just was like he like other people's babies are cute, but like he doesn't know what to do with them. Like he just didn't feel that connection, and he's like, well, I'm sure we'll feel that connection with my own baby. I'm like, you'll be fine. Like I'm sure it'll work out. Who knows, right? It better work out. And I think there's just like a natural inherent connection there, and I feel like he's like blossomed into this role more than he ever thought he would. There's so many positives of him like that, again, like complement mine, like ADHD, sometimes it's hard to multitask, do things on time. I was late for this interview. So yeah, you're trying to like hit bedtimes, nap times, and like I'm like, oopsie, like that's a half an hour ago. Whereas he's more regimented and able to like maintain those like tight deadlines. So babies apparently thrive on consistency, so he's really good at that. And I've been back to Vancity now for about a month, 3 days a week. So I wake up, he goes, does his work thing, comes back. I've had like an hour with Oland, then he takes over and I get ready and go to work. They come visit me on my lunch break, but I mean like he takes care of him 3 days a week, and like of course like he can, why not? Like it's his baby too. But it's cute. They bond. They have their little things now. Like he already has this like little personality. He's like pointing, and yeah, it's just so awesome to see that.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what Wayne does and what he's involved in?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when I first met him. I was like, are you like a spy or something? Like, what do you do? Because he worked, like, yeah, we'd have these late night talking sessions, and he's like, I gotta get up early. And I'm like, yeah, like, what do you do? And he was working from home, working for IBM, which I was like, well, what does that mean, right? Like, IBM's massive. And so he actually worked at a Israeli tech startup company that was based out of someone's home, and it was more just like lead generation. Like he was calling like banks typically, and connecting them with salespeople for like security software and this sort of thing. And these companies were really like innovative and like enough so that IBM thought it a worthy business to buy out. And so he was working for IBM at the time, but he did that for a few years, and they eventually were going to get him to commute out to Richmond. And he's like, I've worked from home for like 5 years. Like, I don't need to go into an office to do this job. And so another Israeli tech company, like word got around that he was really good. And so they asked him to join their company. He could work from home, obviously. He wasn't going to commute to Tel Aviv, Israel. And he took that contract and he worked there for a year. Didn't renew the contract. Paused for a little bit. Then he worked for another one that actually flew him out to Israel. Yeah, that was, but it was such a small startup company, and I mean, they're paying money to fly people out. Like, maybe they weren't quite ready. And so that kind of fizzled out the company itself. And so there was like really not a lot of work for him to do. And so he decided to kind of switch up the game and do something else. But he's like, again, very entrepreneurial. Like we couldn't see him like working at like a bank or anything like that, like 9 to 5. Like he needs to be in control of his own kind of stuff. So he, right now over COVID, he actually got licensed for life insurance and mutual funds. Yeah. Unfortunately, he hasn't had a lot of time to really hone those skills, but yeah, he did that. And then when I met him, he actually was opening a business with one of his friends that he like hones it with, and Jim's Pizza in Sardis. And so yeah, he went from like working there, that was one of his like 3 jobs out of high school. He managed it for a little bit, then he got injured, and that's why he actually took the computer job and not at work. And then they had the opportunity to buy it, so they did. And yeah, and so that's just that's his life, basically. That's
amazing, because I think Jim's Pizza is like an institution in Chilliwack. Like it's got that really community support behind it.
Yeah, I remember working at Stream. That was like a big deal. You got like I think for $10, you got like a large 4-topping. Yeah. So yeah, he's just, and again, really interesting that he worked there for so long, and then that's kind of what brought the opportunity. You never know what kind of connections you're making or where your path is going to lead to. And
yeah, I think that you and him set an amazing example on how to work as a team, on how to approach adversity, and I think the financial literacy pieces, a part I hope people really take away from this is trying to connect to someone to help you on your path, no matter whether or not you need like a really developed plan or just some general tips and guidance on how to do better, because I think that that's something so many people are lacking, and there's such shame with admitting that you don't know and knowing what questions to ask about TFSA, R.E.S.T. Like it's so much jargon that it really discourages people, and I think that you make floating fitness health so much more accessible for people, because these are complex topics, and often with, I think, the wrong spokesperson behind it. Often with places like banks, you've got people who are way too professional and way too hard to connect with. Same with health and wellness and going and trying to get yourself some help. Those often, I find, those people are a bit too pushy to the point where it discourages me, because they perhaps oversell that all my ailments are going to be cured, or they try and sell me on another byproduct that doesn't interest me. And so I think that you do this amazing job of being like accessible to everyone wherever they're at. And I think that that's something I hope people really get out of this, because I think it's really hard for people to let go of some of their own biases, some of their own assumptions about how the world should be, could be, would be if they were in charge, and your ability to just kind of say, where are you at, and let's move from wherever position you are in the best way we can, sets a huge example for all of our listeners, and I really appreciate you being willing to take the time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I think we did over 3 hours.
Jeepers, I figured we would.